विच मिलया तेरा दर्शन मेरिया अखियां तेरा दर्शन मेरिया तेरा दर्शन मेरिया अखियां तेरा दर्शन मेरिया अखियां जितवल लगन चरण तुसारे जितवल लगन चरण तुसारे जितवल लगन चरण तुसारे
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On behalf of Sri Guru Singh Sabha Southall, I'd like to welcome you to the first of our intellectual lecture series, where we'll be hosting renowned author Satnam Singh. As we are running late, without any further ado, I think we'll get started.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much, firstly, for showing up. I'm just going to need a few minutes just to get used to my own voice, so sorry about that. So what we will do in the next hour or so is that I will talk a little bit about the Anandpur court and kind of the work that went into this book that was just released about 2 months ago. Is the sound all right? You can all hear me? Great. And then for roughly about an hour or so, and then I feel very privileged to stand here with Dr. Dapinder Singh, who has a very extensive collection of manuscripts, many of them from the Anandpur court from the time of Maharaj Ranjit Singh, and he will do about a 20-30 minutes small talk and take you through some of the manuscripts that many of you have already been up to see. And then afterwards, if people are interested in knowing more, feel free to come up and ask questions, purchase some books if you find the topic inspiring and so forth. So roughly about 5-ish we should end the day. Yeah? Great. Let's just see here. So what we'll do is that in the next hour or so, we'll explore the development of a culture of intellectual activity that took place in Anandpur Sahib. And I'm very much aware that this is a new topic for many of you, so I'll try as best as possible to present it in a digestible manner. If there's anything I say that doesn't make sense or you would like to hear more about, please just interrupt me. There's not that many of us here anyway. So I prefer if you have questions or anything like that, just raise your hand or just interrupt me. I'm okay with that. It's also much more interesting if it's a little bit more of a ping pong rather than just me talking here. Yeah? What we'll also do is that we'll illumine the vast works that were composed and contained in the Anandpur library. I'll tell you more about that because I realized a lot of people are not aware that there was a grand library in Anandpur. And for those of you who haven't read my book, what I'll talk about is primarily based on 2 chapters from the book. Chapter 2 on the Anandpur library, and then Chapter 5 on what I call the politicization of the Sikh community. If you're interested in more information, if you're wondering where is this coming from, where did I get this information from, obviously you can find the information and the sources and everything in the book. First things first, my name is Satnam Singh. I was born and raised in Denmark, which is a cold country up in the north. I've been studying Sikh history for about, 15, 17 years or something like that now. But it's always been what we call intellectual history. And I'll tell you more about that during this presentation. But usually when people think about history, they think about the narration of events. Then this happened, then that happened, this led to that development. So it's like a lot of stories and it's a lot of, narration of events. But intellectual history is a bit more complicated. It's more about how ideas come into being amongst people, and then how are these ideas transmitted and brought down to younger generations of people. I find that to be much more interesting. So one thing is to say someone wrote a book or someone developed a philosophy, let's say Sikh philosophy, but just because it's developed doesn't mean people automatically start following it. So what is it that makes people listen to something new and then start to follow it? That's a part of intellectual history, and that's what I'm interested in. And also just when I look back at my life, I've never really been interested in martial Sikh history. So the way that Sikh history is presented to us, even like in the iconography, in the visual representations, even like in the langar halls, the images you see, is very martial. It's very much Sikh warriors. It's a very hyper-masculine ideal of a Khalsa male quite often. The gurus often as well, like surrounded with warrior symbology, like horses, weapons, and so forth. And I was never really attracted to that. And I kind of knew that there was an intellectual side to Sikhi, but nobody really spoke about it, and it was quite difficult to find information about it. So yeah, I eventually, 15 years ago, started diving into it and wrote a book about it. And yeah, this is what you can find then in the book. So what you'll see, in the next hour or so is a different approach to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Not as a warrior. I'm not saying the Guru Gobind Singh Ji was not an excellent warrior. Definitely they were. But what you'll see is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji was also an excellent poet, an excellent scholar. And not just that, Guru Gobind Singh Ji was also a patron of the arts. I'll get more into that later. One thing you'll also notice in the next upcoming slides is that there's a lot of paintings. Like I said, a lot of the visual representation of Guru Gobind Singh Ji has been through his martial aspects. So what I thought during the lockdowns is that we need new images of Guru Gobind Singh Ji to also capture this scholarly side, which I will invite you into in a few seconds. But we need to have that represented, especially for the younger generations as well. They need to see this as they grow up. So during the lockdowns, I initiated this thing called the Anandpur Art Project, where some of the leading painters in the world, they contributed with a painting where Guru Gobind Singh Ji or one of his court poets are represented. So that now we have images of some of these court poets, some of whose writings you will also be able to find here in Dr. D's collection. Yeah, with me so far? Great. Is it okay with the sound? It's all good? Great. I'm going to need 2 more minutes to get used to my voice, but it should be fine. All right. So, obviously, Guru Gobind Singh Ji does not need a further introduction. Guru Gobind Singh Ji is obviously the 10th Guru of the Sikh tradition. And when we read the combined writings that have been passed down to us from our ancestors, you could say, then the image that comes about is one of a warrior, is one of a poet. We encounter Guru Gobind Singh Ji as a musician, as a political engineer, as a father, as a husband, and as a leader. Often referred to as the Purush Uttam, the supreme being, the grand being, one who has mastered all these different qualifications that you can be as a man. What we also see in the same sources is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji had a very thorough education. which actually matched the imperial standards of the day. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji was educated in Sanskrit, in Persian, in Arabic, in Braj, which we'll come back to as a form of sophisticated Hindi, Gurumukhi, Shastra Vidya, swordsmanship, musicology, weapon manufacturing, like how to create your own weapons, and then specific forms of literature that was considered the highest form of Vidya at the time. So this is the Puranas, the Shastras, the Quran, classical Persian literature, and so forth. And like I said, this was a form of elite education that the Guru received. So just to make it a little bit more understandable today, the education that the highest person or people, the nobility of the Mughal court would receive, the Sikhs around Guru Gobind Singh Ji, they found out what is that curriculum, and then they brought it to Anandpur and started to teach not just Guru Gobind Singh Ji, but also the Sikhs, the children around Guru Gobind Singh Ji in this Vidya. So again, just to use a corny example, but it would be similar to figuring out what do they teach at Cambridge or at Oxford, what's the curriculum there, and then start to teach some of that here to the children in the Singh Sabha Southall Gurudwara. You have to see it more like that. So this is why the early sources refer to Guru Gobind Singh Ji as a Purush Uttam. Then this is what I find intriguing, that one of the sources, this is the Bansavali Nama, then just casually mentions that then after the Guru had completed his linguistic studies, it just casually mentions that then the Guru spent every evening in the study of Raj Niti stories, which he benefited greatly from. And we'll get back to which stories these were soon. But basically my whole book is about what were these stories, and what I can reveal now is that these are political stories that teaches how to govern territories, how to govern country, and so forth. And basically, like I said, political engineering. Yes?
And can I ask you why you use the term tradition and not religion?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there is, in academia, there is this discussion of whether you can call religions from India as religions, because the understanding we have of the word religion is very much based on Christianity. What does religion entail? You need a holy book, you need a God that you believe in, you need a church that you attend, and so forth. And Indian religions don't really follow that pattern. So it's a way in modern academia to kind of separate and say you have religions in the Middle East, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, but then you have these dharmic traditions in India. So you wouldn't necessarily see the concept, the Sikh religion per se, in modern academia. I think for most people this is just like potato, it's like insignificant, what's the point? But it's very significant in academia that they don't refer to Sikhi and Hinduism and all these other ones as a religion. You'll even notice that people don't use the word Sikhism because it's not indigenous to, like we don't use that word, we call it Sikhi, right? So what they say is that Sikhism is a dead ism, where Sikhi is it's a vibrant faith. It's something that's alive. Sikhism just sounds like a dead ideology, right? I think for most people this probably doesn't make much sense, but it's something they're very much aware of in the academic community. Yeah?
Raj Niti stories, what does that sort of, where do they originate from?
I'll get to that very, very shortly. And the whole point of departure for my book is what were these Raj Niti stories that the Guru Gobind Singh Ji was studying and introduced to as a child. Yes. Like I said, feel free to ask questions as we go along, yeah? All right. So, one thing is that if we try to look away from Guru Gobind Singh Ji as a warrior, one thing we need to realize is that the way we understand, also related to what you said here, the way we understand war today is very different from how wars were fought back in the day. So when we think about war, we're thinking about the US-Afghan war that lasted about 20 years, thinking about Ukraine war that's been going on for now 2-3 years or something like that. Second World War lasted 5 years. So when we think about war, like the Cold War, I don't know, 30-40 years. So when we think about war conflicts, usually something that lasts a very, very long time. Back then, war was more efficient. So they often just lasted a few days and that was it. So when we hear about Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and especially when we see all the different images and paintings, we think Guru Gobind Singh Ji spent most of his life fighting wars. But many of these battles, the Battle of Bangani and so forth, they didn't last for more than a few days. It was more efficient. You had a martial objective. You went in, you took over the territory, you killed the enemy or whatever, and then you kind of went back to normal. So my question has always been, what was Guru Gobind Singh Ji and the Sikhs doing when they were not fighting wars? Because if most of these battles just lasted a few days, obviously it means that something else was being done. And what we'll see is obviously that Guru Gobind Singh spent his time in literary pursuits and built up this grand library. Like you can see here, roughly about 25 years. So just think back, what were you guys doing 25 years ago? Look at how the world has changed in 25 years. Like even 9/11 hadn't even happened 25 years ago, right? So this is a very long time. It's not just a sporadic thing, a passion that the Sikhs had for a few years and it kind of died out. This is very consistent. For 25 years, Guru Gobind Singh Ji and the Sikhs around him are engaged in academic and intellectual pursuits. So again, the question, why then do we have such a strong focus on the martial activities if what I say is true, that these battles and wars often just lasted for a few days? It's true, some of the battles did last for longer. So the Battle of Chamkor and the Siege of Anandpur lasted much longer. But most of them, they lasted for a few days. And you just look it up in the history books yourself. So again, this is why I think we need to take a step back and look at what the Sikhs were actually primarily engaged with throughout this period. What we see is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji invited more than 100 scholars from across the Indo-Islamic world to come to Anandpur, settle there, bring their books, and then the Guru paid them heavily in order to do some translational and scholarly activities. And some of it you'll see here, this is the literary output of Anandpur. So there's a traffic of scholars from across, so these are non-Sikhs by the way. So there's a traffic of non-Sikh scholars coming into Anandpur from outside. And then at the same time, we know from the same sources that Guru Gobind Singh Ji sends out these scouts of Sikhs to go into Benares, to Kashmir, some of these ancient centers of learning, intellectual cities, to bring back any book that can benefit the Sikhs. So the Sikhs are sent out, probably being told, you need to bring this Granth back to Anandpur, and then they go out, try to find it, purchase it, see if they can find a copy, maybe write it themselves, like copy it, and then bring it back. And this is how the Anandpur library is slowly being assembled. So one thing is that books are being brought in by these scouts, and then, like I said, a lot of these scholars are also bringing their own libraries with them, and then, as we shall see, a lot of them are writing and translating books, producing books in Anandpur as well. So what we see is that the Sikhs here, through the, yeah? Yeah, very good question. So the question is, what was the motive? Why is Guru Gobind Singh Ji bringing these different Granths, also from different traditions, into Anandpur? What I will basically argue in the next 30 minutes is Guru Gobind Singh Ji was trying to culturally educate the Sikhs, to make them familiar with the world around them, the knowledge, the ideas that the ancients had compiled, to basically make that knowledge accessible to the Sikhs. You could say that, yeah. So in this sense, Guru Gobind Singh Ji is continuing a tradition that the previous gurus had also embarked upon. But what we see, I'll come to that in a few seconds, is that this is an expansion of topics. So in the Guru Granth Sahib, you see a lot of the bhakti, poetry, and then the vidya that have been contained. This is one aspect, but what we see here is a multiplication. I'll show you that in a few seconds. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. You mean who were the teachers of Guru Gobind Singh? Yeah, so It's a very good question. I can't remember it on the back top of my head, but we, in the same different sources, the Bansavali Nama, the Gurbilas Pasha, some of these biographies of Guru Gobind Singh Ji that were written, we get the names of the different teachers that Guru Gobind Singh Ji had, and these were obviously brought in and hired by Guru Tegh Bahadur and by the different adults around Guru Gobind Singh Ji to provide this, like I said, imperial education. Yeah, I think I've mentioned some of the names here in my book, actually. I can't remember on top of mind, yes. Yeah, so basically the accumulated knowledge that the known world had acquired at this time, primarily written in Persian, Arabic to some extent, but Sanskrit in particular, all of this was brought to Anandpur, and then the Sikhs, all the poets begin to translate it to make it accessible to the Sikhs who come to have darshan of the Guru. So ancient books, they were translated, they were studied, they were copied, and then stored in this house of scholars. And Gyani Gyan Singh, who's a writer from the 1800s, he calls it a makan, which you basically translate to a mansion or a palace. So the scholars who came to Anandpur from outside were put in this palace where they resided, which kind of shows that they were provided with very much respect and dignity. And some historians have even said that the scholars were paid more. This was not a seva, by the way. They were paid to do this work. They were paid more than his own soldiers were, because Guru Gobind Singh Ji wanted to culturally educate his followers. Over time, as more books arrive in Anandpur, as more books are being produced in Anandpur, and as more scholars come into Anandpur, this house, this makan, this palace, eventually come to become a translation bureau, because a lot of translations are being done. You can see some of them here. A lot of these are translations of ancient Sanskrit works. It's a library, it's a book depository, it's a learning institution. A lot of debates are happening where they're discussing philosophy and so forth, and an academy of scholars, basically for scholars from all over the northern Mughal Empire. And again, just to emphasize, this is happening for more than 25 years. So it's a continued effort. The Guru continuously pours resources into this. Yeah. All right. So let's continue with the Anandpur library. The works that are either produced in Anandpur or brought into Anandpur, or primarily, like I said, in Braj, but also in Farsi, Punjabi, Sanskrit, and Arabic. What's interesting, again, this might be nerdy for many people, or it's difficult to see the significance of it, but what we see is that there's sporadic revision. Some granths are being retranslated, and there's, later on I'll come back to that, there's some commentary happening as well. Now, why is this significant? Because we see in the early days of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Raj, like 5 years after he becomes a guru, that he commissions one of his poets, we have the Granth here actually, to translate the Hitubadesha, which is an ancient Sanskrit book about fables. I'll come back to that later. 5 years after the first translation has been made, another one is produced, commissioned most likely by the Guru. So what we see is that it mostly, we can't know this for sure, but it most likely signifies that the Sikhs had become, or the scholars there had become better at linguistic capabilities. They're more proficient in the Braj language now, so they're going to redo something they had done as a first attempt 5 years earlier. So this is a second attempt, but a much more proficient one, because if you read this particular Granth, the poet says, I will enhance it poetically. I will use different forms of poetry than the one that was made 5 years ago. So it's just like people who study literature, this is gold of information. Because again, it just shows that the environment in which it was produced has increased. They can do better productions now than the first ones that were there initially. Maybe because more sophisticated scholars have come to Anandpur now than those who came initially. Does that make sense? Yeah. Also, what you see is that commentaries start to appear. So the interesting thing with a commentary is that one thing is that you do a translation. Here's a Sanskrit book about mathematics or biology or whatever, and then you do a translation of it, like line by line. But when you do that's one thing. That's a difficult task in itself. But when you do a commentary of it, it also shows that whoever commented on it has mastered the whole field of mathematics. He's mastered the whole field of philosophy. So now he's in a position to either challenge the content or provide provide additional meanings to what is this original author trying to say here. Does that make sense? Because any random Joe cannot make a commentary about Shakespeare or make a commentary about any subject. You need to have a good grounding in the subject that you're trying to comment on. Does that make sense? Yeah, so again, just the fact that we later on see that commentaries are made, it shows us that the level in Anandpur has risen. Which again, for people who study literature, this is a gold mine of information. So, maybe coming back to your question here. So what we see over these 25 years is that there's a vast scope of themes that is being studied, debated in Anandpur, and so forth. We're talking about history, mythology, hagiography, poetry, literature manuals, political theory, books about zoology, medicine, eroticism, philosophy, palmistry, mysticism, geology, lexica, dictionaries. I can just go on and on and on. Like I said, sounds maybe a little bit exaggerated, but the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, they were bringing that into Anandpur to study it. And roughly 140 works appear to have survived today. Some of them you can find here in the Pothi format. Unfortunately, most of them have been lost throughout history, especially during the siege of Anandpur, where a lot of these were lost in the Sirsa river. But just the fact that we still have 140, whereby we can see that these 140 follow these different themes, shows us the tip of the iceberg, and it shows us like a window into what the original library may have contained. So you could kind of say that, all right, if we have one book, or like we have 2 or 3 books about zoology, we have books about dogs, falcons, horses, elephants, there probably were many, many more. It's not just a one-off. It's probably something the Guru was commissioning in a wider format. Like again, with medicine, it's very unlikely there was just one book on Ayurveda medicine that was being produced. That there were probably many, many more. Especially because a lot of these topics here was more of a wider canon in the Sanskrit world. It was like a whole genre, you can say. Does that make sense? Great. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, so I have an appendix in the book, and I'll list them all from what I've been able to find. So there's a whole list there. And all of them obviously falls into these categories. That's why I've listed it like that. Yeah. Yeah. No, very, very good question.
Because all the fort were besieged by the Mughals afterwards, and we Pahari Raja, nothing was left out.
So, very good question. The question is, was everything lost when the Guru crossed the Sirsa River, the Guru and the Sikhs? So, this is a very simple way that this story has been told to us throughout history. Sociologically speaking, it's a bit more complicated. So, what we do know is that a lot of these writings have obviously survived because throughout these 25 years, copies were made. Sangats came to Anandpur over these 25 years to have darshan of their Guru, but some of them, they received pothia, which they then brought back to their village outside Punjab and so forth. And these pothia, you can find them in different archives in India. So it's not that everything was lost, but a lot was unfortunately lost. But many copies have been made. And this is why we have access to at least 140 of them. I think in my list I have about 160 that I mentioned throughout. So the popular story, which I don't really believe in it, but the popular story is that all of it was lost in the Sirsa River. But because copies were made over a 25-year period, Sangats came from far away. They brought these manuscripts and pothia back to their own village. Then they have survived in the villages. And then you can find them, like I said.
So these were the copies, not originals.
Yeah. I don't think many originals are still here. Some originals did actually survive, but unfortunately were lost in 1984 when the Indian Army set the Sikh reference library on fire. I think I mentioned that in my book as well. Yeah. All right. So this one has nothing to do with Anandpur or Sikh literature. It says mirror. Can you see what it says, by the way, on the? Yeah. So it basically says mirrors, windows, and doors. It's a Western way of approaching literature, which I really like. And basically, you can divide literature into three formats. So one is literature that works as a mirror for you. So when something works as a mirror for you, it means that when you read it, you learn something about yourself. Like in modern writing, you learn about your traumas and your triggers. You learn about something that makes you smarter on who am I as a person. That form of literature you call a mirror. Because again, it's like looking in the mirror. Now I understand why I do things the way I do it. The other one is called a window. That's a form of literature where you're looking at other people at a distance. So the book may be about poverty in London. And if you don't live in impoverished conditions, then at least by reading this book, you can understand what it means to grow up poor. So it's like you're looking through a window at some other people and you learn about their experiences. Does that make sense? And the third one is doors. And that is basically transformative literature. This is literature that is there to make you do things in a different way. It is there to make you change things, basically to transform you. What I argue in my book is that most of Sikh literature is actually transformative. It's there to change your way, change your ethics, change your spiritual condition, change your political aspirations, change your boom, 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 right? And what we see in a lot of these granths here is that this is what we call door. In other words, it's action-oriented literature. It's not there for you to sit and say, wow, these are great ideas. No, these are great ideas, so you better implement them in society, or you better implement these ideas in your own life. And like I said, most of the Anandpuri writings that Guru Gobind Singh Ji commissions is this door or action-oriented literature. I have a whole chapter about this in the book. Does that make sense? It's a very good way, actually, just in general, for you guys to approach literature. Yeah? I can't hear you, sorry. Yeah. So the question is, the Sikhs who were still left behind in Anandpur Sahib after the siege and after the Mughals took over the city, did they have a role in preserving these manuscripts? So I think it's Kavi Santokh Singh, who's a later Sikh author. He says that after the Sikhs had left the city, some of them came back to look for the granths that were still like spread out through the wind. So there was an attempt to collect some of them. And then I think Kavi Santokh Singh, if I remember correctly, says about 60 folios or 60 pages were recovered. And then he starts to quote from those 60 pages that he, in his own time, still had in his hands. But there most likely was an emphasis on trying to find these different granths that have been lost. We have this letter by Mani Singh as well, where Mani Singh is trying to, he's writing a letter to the court in Delhi, saying, I'm trying to compile the Dasam Granth. I found the Krishna Avatar, I found parts of the Gyan Prabodh, I found parts of the Charitra Pakyan. I'm still looking for. So here again, you can see that they're trying to assemble the lost parts, if that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, also going back to some of your questions, some works have survived through copies. So copies were made, these were put into the villages by the Sangats who came to have darshan of the Guru, and then copies were made of those copies in the villages, right? So fortunately, there's still a lot of these pothia available. And I did some manuscript research in my book from the collection that we have here. I was very fortunate to be able to do that from the Dr Dapinder Singh Collection. And what you can obviously have darshan yourself after this little presentation, but I just want to introduce you, show you like what I find to be interesting with these granths. And for instance, what I find intriguing about this here is that this is a Persian writing, this by Nandalal, from the Ghazals and written in classical Persian. But what you see here is that you have Punjabi translation in red ink that's trying to explain the content. So the way that you approach this historically is that you see, all right, so the person maybe in the early 1800s, so we're in the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh here, the person who had this pothi with him probably used it in a setting of teaching some students. So he made notes for himself, which may indicate that he didn't know Persian himself. He was not familiar with the Persian language, hence he has to make translations as notes for himself while he's teaching this content to other people. So what you can see is that this is a form of a teaching capacity in an environment of scholars and their students, whereby they're preserving the vidya of the Anandpur court in little teaching circles. Does that make sense? Yeah. So again, for people interested in literature, this is gold, because one thing, like I said, is that these granths were produced, but how are they being used by the later generations? That's to some extent even more intriguing to figure out, because one of the worst nightmares of any author is that you write a book and then it's just lying on a shelf somewhere, nobody ever reads it, right? That's like the worst thing that can happen. Here you can see, because there's all these notes in it, that it's being used by later generations. And then there's people like me who even when I have my own books at home, in the beginning I rarely used to make notes in it. I consider it blasphemy, like you're ruining it. But it's actually quite nice for me to see other people have done that in the past, because now I can see how they were using it. Which words did they find interesting? Because these are the words or the teachings they wanted to transmit to whoever students they had around them. Does that make sense? So there's so much gold to mine out from these different botya. So when I saw this back in 2020 in the Dr. Dapinder Singh Collection, I was intrigued more by the notes here than the actual content. Yeah. Again, you can see here, this is from Dharam Singh's Kok Shastra. This is a book about, it's a part of, this was translated by Dharam Singh in the Anandpur court. It's about eroticism. It's a part of the Indian Kama Sutra tradition. And what's interesting here is that you can see there's some Urdu notes here. So you can see, obviously, it says, here, you can see here, there's some Urdu notes throughout the margins. Because it's written in Urdu, it most likely means that some student had used this particular manuscript in the time of the British, because it was during the British colonial period that Urdu was introduced in Punjab. So this just shows us that 200 years after the destruction of the Anandpur court, Sikhs were still, even in the time of the British, using these granths for their own personal or like in a teaching capacity. Yeah. This is also again from the Dr. Dapinder Singh Collection. I think I saw it here just before. Yeah, again, the interesting thing here is just that it specifically mentions that this Granth was written in Anandpur. So here in this Dohra it says that I made Anandpur my new home because of its beautiful trees, gardens, the forest I encountered there, the birds that I saw and the animals. And because of this beautiful scenery, I came to Anandpur. Again, why did people come to Anandpur? Sometimes they wrote it themselves why they came. Some did it for money, some did it because of the natural scenery, and others did it because Shraddha for the Guru. So obviously, we're talking about more than 100 people, so obviously they came for different reasons as well. Does it make sense? So after this little presentation, you can come and have darshan yourself of these different manuscripts. All right, so again, going back to this question that came before about the word religion and even like the way we understand war. Another thing is that the way we use or understand court poets, when I use that word, or even just poets in general, we think of people who are very artistic, very serene and composed forms of people, sitting, being inspired, composing their poetry. But what Alison Bush in her book Poetry of King reminds us is that this is not the only thing. This is not the right, proper way to understand a court poet back in the day. So she writes that court poets could be, among other things, teachers, advisors, historians, political commentators, diplomats, and military men. They were essential not only to the literary culture, but also to the society of their day. What I like about this quote is that we have to think the Guru Gobind Singh Ji brought more than 100 of such people to Anandpur to teach his Sikhs. So these are skilled people who were diplomats, they're military men, they're political commentators, and they're brought into the Sikh spaces to teach the Sikhs something in order to culturally educate them. Can you hear me now? I'll put the mic a little bit down. Great. You may know this already, but like roughly about 10 to 20% of the Anandpuri court poets, they migrated from other world courts of the subcontinent, which obviously makes sense because this is why they have all these different skills, right? So here you can just read it yourself, but here you have the names of some of the court poets, which court in either the central Mughal court or the decentral one in Delhi, in the Multan, in Lahore and elsewhere. And then, so who else did they serve? And then finally you can see what kind of granths did they either produce or bring to Anandpur. Yeah. You can just read it for yourself. Can I skip? Great. All right, let's just do this quickly. So when you look at the combined, not the combined, but just the overview of what did they study in Anandpur, these are some of the titles that pop up. The Upanishads, Chanakya's Raj Niti, the Hitopdesha, the Mahabharata, the 18 Puranas, Ayurveda literature, Upanishads, Shahnameh, and so forth. Some people, I would argue, will have an allergic reaction to this. They'll be like, this is like Hindu granths. What does these Hindu granths, like even the granths that we have here, some of them are like from the Mahabharata. What does this have to do with Sikhi? So some people may have an allergic reaction to it. Again, Sikhs are not Hindus. So why are the Sikhs studying these granths? It must be false. The Guru would never do this. This is kind of the logic. But let's try to go away from all this Hindu, what's a Sikh, what happened in 84 and so forth, and just look at the content on its own, right? What we'll see is that if we look at the content and not necessarily the granth itself, then we can see that the Upanishads contain spiritualism and knowledge of the self. Chanakya's Raj Niti, obviously about political posture, human psychology and ethics. Hitopdesha is about political agency and governance. The Mahabharata is about battle strategies, courtly etiquette. The Puranas, we often think, is about mythology and these demons and gods and all these different stories, but it's actually about architecture. It's about gardenery, it's about biology, it's about geography, mineralogy, sculpturing. It's very sophisticated encyclopedic works. Ayurveda is about medicine and so forth, and zoology is about obviously how to treat animals, even like in terms of illnesses and so forth. So what you can see here is that, like I've been repeating a few times now, the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world were put into Islamic writings or Hindu writings. But back then they weren't considered Hindu writings. This was just Vidya. It's only later on when the British started doing their divide and conquer that we started to say, all right, this is a Hindu. Going back to your question about what's a religion, right? In order to have a religion, you need to have some holy literature. All right, in Christian tradition, in the Christian religion, this is our holy literature. So the Hindus must have something similar. And then the Gore began to say what is Hindu literature, Hindu holy literature, and then they began to mention a lot of this. But back then, this was just considered Vidya on warfare, Vidya on battle strategies and political science, and so forth. Again, I've talked extensively about this in one of the chapters in my book, because we need to get out of that mindset that this is Hindu writing, so this is Islamic writings per se. This was not even considered that at the time. All right, now what's interesting is that the reason that the Sikhs are studying this in Anandpur is because this was the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. Yeah. So if the Sikhs, which I argue, they wanted to create their own Raj, if they want to understand how to do governance in the Indo-Islamic world, they need to understand first how are other people governing sovereign territories. So how are the Mughals, which granths do they use for political science and so forth. And this is why they went into this. If we were to make Western parallels, we are sitting in the West. If we want to understand the surrounding society around us, studying Chanakya, who's an ancient political philosopher in India, studying Chanakya is not going to tell you how things go about in Downing Street number 10. Is that correct? Yeah. Studying Chanakya is not going to tell you anything about how the Guri do politics. So if you were to take that principle that Guru Gobind Singh Ji wanted his Sikhs to study the knowledge around them, to understand society around them, then this is how it would look like. Then you would see a Gurdwara studying Machiavelli, Martin Luther, Rousseau, Freud, Sartre, Aristotle, Socrates, Adam Smith, in order to master the exact same topics. Does that make sense? Do you see the significance of this? Because if you went into Sabha Southall Gurdwara here for a Sikh circle, educational circle, you would expect them to study Janam Sakhis by Gurdas Varas. You would expect them to study Gurbani, maybe some Taksali writings, so forth. But you wouldn't expect them to sit and study Machiavelli and Martin Luther and Freud. And if you saw that, you'd be like, what are these guys doing? This is a Gurdwara, go to the university and do this, right? Back then, this separation did not exist. Because like I said, in Sikh centers of learning, they were studying what was today's Machiavelli, Martin Luther, in Sikh centers of learning. I'm pretty sure many from the Sangat came to Anandpur and had that same realization. What are these Sikhs doing? What does this have to do with Sikhi? But like I said, this is the knowledge they needed to acquire, not outside the Sikh centers of learning, but within them. Obviously, Anandpur being the supreme Sikh center of learning. All right, I'm running a little bit out of time, so let me hurry up. All right, so this is just a backdrop, okay? Now we're going to get to the juice. Now we're going to get to the real stuff. So what I say is that, because my book is obviously titled, The Road to Empire, The Political Education of Khalsa Sikhs in the Late 1600s. What I noticed when I was doing Anandpuri research, what were they studying in Anandpur, is that a lot of these granths had to do with political science. They were about how to govern society, how to rule society, how to basically create a government and bureaucracies and so forth. And I was like, it seems to be it's not just a coincidence. It seems like Guru Gobind Singh is actively pursuing this topic for his Sikhs to study. So there's this famous quote, or I don't know if it's famous or not, but it's this very beautiful quote from the Pan Prakash from the 1810s. So this is the early days of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's rule, where the Guru says, "My Sikhs will one day study kingship and they will forget their former peaceful ways. In time, they will become kings, governing from their horses." So the Guru Gobind Singh Ji says this straight after, or right after Guru Tegh Bahadur has become Shaheed. He looks at his Sikhs and he's a bit, the Guru Gobind Singh Ji is a bit, not disgusted, but like appalled by their like condition at the time, asking, why didn't anyone stand up in the defense of Guru Tegh Bahadur's life? Like, we've had an army in the Sikh community since the time of Guru Hargobind Sahib. The same army was nurtured by Guru Har Rai Sahib. So why didn't anyone stand? We have Miri Piri was obviously a part of the Sikh tradition in the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So why didn't anyone stand up to defend my father's life? And this is why we see in our historical books that Guru Gobind Singh Ji had realized that the Sikhs had become too, I think we call it docile, like feeble. They had become too, like they had misunderstood what it means to be a humble person. They had misunderstood what it means to be a spiritual person, because people are just walking all over them. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, I need to like reprogram you guys. And then he says, my Sikhs will study kingship and forget their former peaceful ways, which has led to their own ruin, because now the Guru Tegh Bahadur had become Shaheed. In time, so through this study, which will take time, in time they will become kings, governing from their horses. So what we'll do, just to pedagogically illustrate it, is that we'll put up this timeline here. So 1675, this is the year Guru Tegh Bahadur becomes Shaheed, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji obviously becomes Guru. Then 1704, the late 1704, you have the sacking of Anandpur, which I've been alluding to. So it's roughly about, 30 years here. Let's see, what does Guru Gobind Singh Ji do around this time, okay? Let's look away from all the battles. Let's just look what is actually happening here. Very early on, this is within 4 years, Guru Gobind Singh Ji commissions the Hitubadesha to be created, and then 4 years later, this is what I mentioned before, a retranslation is done of the exact same Granth. I'm not even sure you can read what it says because of but you can see here that Guru Gobind Singh Ji has an interest in this book called the Hitubadesha. Yeah. Does anyone here know what the Hitubadesha is? Yeah. Would you mind sharing what you know about the Hitubadesha?
I think I bought it because you put it on Instagram.
Very good. Yeah.
Friendship, and then it ends with like war strategy or how to govern. It's got 4 chapters in it.
That's right.
It was written, I don't know how long ago.
2,000 years ago, yeah.
But it was a book that was taught to princely children so they could understand through fables and animals, a bit like we have Aesop's fables, to understand friends are made, and there's runs, etc., etc. So kind of unconsciously, they're learning about statecraft and friendships without actually learning it through humans. They're learning it through animals and different types, making friends with each other, or getting on, or being strategic and usurping each other in different ways. I don't know.
Thank you. That was spot on. I can just skip my next slide. But let's ask Google just to see what is the Hitobdesha. Obviously, Google knows everything. Now ChatGPT knows everything, but let's try Google first. If you type in Hitobdesha, what you said is exactly what comes up. It's all these different fables. Now, again, just to say, why is this significant? What it is with fables is that obviously it's aiming towards children. Yeah. So Hitobdesha is a book that was written 2,000 years ago to teach children about Raj Niti, but in a child-friendly manner. So Raj Niti, politics, is obviously it's an adult topic, but you need children to understand Raj Niti, so one day they can take over society and govern it. Like if you're a prince, you need to be a king one day. So you start teaching them Raj Niti as children. This is the Indic way. It's not something you learn at university when you're in your 20s. You're taught this growing up. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji wants his followers after the Shahidi of Guru Tegh Bahadur to understand Raj Niti. And what it does, like I said, it's in a child-friendly manner. So what it does is it takes different animals from the animal kingdom. Obviously, each of them have different characteristics. So obviously, the lion is a brave animal. It's the king of the jungle. It's a strategic animal. Thinks far. And there's the crow. Some of these animals are like more sneaky. They're more conniving, and so forth. And then it uses these different examples to bring home a point. So I think if I remember one story from the Hitobdesha is that there's two sheep who are out walking, let's say in the forest, and they encounter a tiger. And the tiger says, "Do you want to be my friend?" And the two sheep are not quite sure. One says, "No, I've learned from my parents or someone else that you shouldn't trust sheep. You guys are dangerous for us." And then the tiger goes, "No, we're not dangerous. Like I'm a good tiger. Yeah, sure, my people are dangerous, but I'm a good one. I will be your friend. I will protect you. I will do everything not to harm you." And then the sheep are a little bit conflicted because but my knowledge says I shouldn't stay near you guys, but you're speaking soft words to me. So the sheep talk to one another and they're like, "What should we do?" And then they decide to give this animal a chance, this tiger a chance, and they end up getting eaten. So the story for children here is trust your gut instinct, trust the knowledge that you have been given by your elders. Don't just give people the benefit of the doubt just because they're talking sweet words, right? You can see this is a human, most people who are smiling here, but this is something even adults basically struggle with, but this is taught in a very childlike manner. And there's I think there's about 100 different stories in the animal kingdom that goes through these human concepts of trust, of this and that, but like I said, in a child-friendly manner. It's one of the most popular books to have ever come out of India in Sanskrit civilization. It's been translated to, I think after the Bible, this is the most translated book in the world. In the past 2,000 years, the Arabs, they translated the Persians. Obviously, the Sikhs had translated it, and all Indian languages have it. And then through the Arab translations, it came to Europe, and now you have the French and blah, blah, blah. It's a very famous one. Now, what I want to emphasize is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji, very early on, wants his Sikhs to study the Hitobdesha. And what I show in my book is that there's a lot of elements where you can see that the teachings of the Hitobdesha keep popping up in Sikh history. And the manuscript continue within the 1700s, even in the time of the Mistals, the Maharaj Ranjit Singh period, and so forth. Yeah, all right. So what happens is that after the second edition has been made, we see a mushrooming of new granths that Guru Gobind Singh Ji wants his Sikhs to study. All of these, you probably can't read it, but all of these are political granths. And many of these are massive political granths, not like small books, these are massive. So what we have here is the only one book of the Mahabharata, which is a book about politics, by the way. And there's 18 in total. This is just one of them. Yeah, so it's the longest epic ever created on Raj Niti, basically. So yeah, here you can see the Hitubdesha, Raj Niti, Rakabit, you have the Shahnameh, you have the Dasam Granth, you have the Puranas, Chanakya, Raj Niti, Mahabharat, Hazuri Ratnama, you have the Prem Sumarag, the Gobind Gita, Hitubdesha. All of these Granths are Raj Niti Granths. They teach you one way or the other how to govern societies, how to protect the society that you have, and so forth. So again, this is not just a sporadic thing. These are not, like I said, minor Granths. These are massive Granths. It requires very skilled people to even be able to translate it. But also like the effort, the resources that are poured into, you can just see the massive size of this one, and there's 18 in total. This is just one of them. So obviously, this is something the Guru really highly prioritizes. All right, in the next 5-7 minutes, I'll try to wrap it up. What we see is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji introduces a concept called Niti to his followers. So Niti, so a lot of these Granths, they would, in an Indian context, they would be classified as Niti Granths. And Niti is the gray zones of human life. Yep. So in Guru Granth Sahib, we often hear about, I think you call it dichotomic worldview. So you have like these polars. You have the vices and the virtues, you have the sinners and the saints, the gurmukhs and the manmukhs, you have Miri, you have Bidi, you have Sangat, you have Bangat. It's like it plays with these dualities, right? And in between these dualities, you have a gray zone. And this is a whole genre that's called Niti. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji introduces Niti to his followers and really illumines it. You already have Niti in the Guru Granth Sahib as well, but here it's just really emphasized much more. So again, Niti is often seen as the gray zones of human conduct where vice and virtue just ceases to exist. So situations, it's basically the gray zones, right? So situations where being a forgiving person might not really be an appropriate attribute to have, and being humble is a sign of weakness. Because if you are in certain situations, being a forgiving person might not be good, because the person that you keep forgiving will keep harming you, because they see it as a sign of weakness, that you don't stand up for yourself, right? Or being humble, like I said, is a sign of weakness. They don't understand. Many of you have encountered this at your workplace as well. Trying to be humble, you're trying to work, cooperate, and you just see people walking all over you. They get all the promotions and so forth. So Niti basically argues that in some situations, all the good qualities that you have acquired through your bhakti, it doesn't work in those scenarios because people are going to walk all over you, and you may cause your own ruin by continuing and not using critical thinking. Like I said, Niti kind of thinking can also be found in the Guru Granth Sahib. So Guru Granth Sahib often, there's many verses in the Asa Divan in particular where it tells you to look through the hypocrisy of the ruling elites of the religious clergy. Just because people say something, it doesn't mean that they live up to their words. They're like walking the walk, talking the talk, all these things. Like Guru Granth Sahib doesn't say just because people look a certain way, you should follow them or like take their words for value. Look at their whole lifestyle and so forth. This falls in the Indian category. This falls under the concept of Niti. Yeah. So be a critical thinker. Call out hypocrisy, even if it's from the religious elite and so forth. Yeah. So do you understand what's specific about Niti? Do you understand it? Yeah. So it's basically preparing you for a world where treachery, people stabbing you in the back is the norm. Yeah. Obviously, politics is a dirty game. So this is what Niti does. It prepares you for a world of politics. I don't know if you can read this, but this is a very good explanation of Niti from Chandra Rajan, who wrote a very good commentary of the Hitubdesha. I don't know if you can read it. We can try to see. Is it eligible? Yeah, try to read it. Yeah? So I'm very conscious of time because we started 15 minutes later. Is there anyone who has to leave here at 5 sharp, or can we? Yeah, so we can take a little bit extra time if needed. Great, thank you. All right, so this is Niti. Yeah? So a lot of these Granths that we today misunderstand, and what does this have to do with Sikhi, or how the Guru could hardly have written this, is because it's meant for different psyche, it's meant for different scenarios, different from what we're encountering today. So here's another, you can't see it, but this is a quote from the Panchatantra, which is an edition of the Hitopdesha. This is a Sanskrit book, but it's translated twice in the Anandpur quote as well. Here it says, a state cannot be governed in accordance with the nature and norms of the common man. What are vices in ordinary men? Those very vices are virtues in kings. Again, I know probably controversial to some of you guys, but the idea is basically being a civilian, having a little bit of ego, having ego is a bad thing. Having pride is a bad thing. You should learn to control your ego, learn to control your pride, your competitive mindset, all these things. These are not good things. This is something you need to control so they don't control you. The idea is basically in the realm of Raj Niti, you should have pride. You should have a certain amount of ego, and you should have a certain amount of competitiveness as well, because you have to protect your society against people who are willing to destroy you, basically. So as a king, you need to be a strong king, not someone who's just going to get run over, because you have the responsibility of hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of subjects under you. Yeah. So again, it's not saying like just be an egotistical tyrant or anything like that, but it basically means you need a little bit of this in order to be, in order to run a government. Again, a state cannot be governed in accordance with the nature of the norms of the common man. What are vices in ordinary men? Those various vices are virtues in kings. Yeah.
Maharaja Ranjit Singh gets a lot of criticism for his vices, but I guess he needed to have those to show the outer world that I'm strong, I'm as good as you, or I have the power here. And so he perhaps needed those vices to put on a front.
That's one way of looking at it, that this is what was needed, this is what was expected of kings at the time. So maybe this is what he said to justify his own actions and so forth. But you can, in the old political world, find arguments that says you need to have a little bit of backbone in order to frighten your enemies so they don't come harming your citizens and so forth. There's another one, but this is not, I don't think I've, let me think. I think in my 9th chapter I talk about one political position in Anandpur that says a king will only be, a Maharaja will only be judged in accordance to how he treats his subjects. So if he causes them any pain, this is all he will be judged by in the afterlife. If he causes them happiness, he will be judged by that as well. So his personal life, whether he wants to live this way or that way, doesn't really matter, because he needs to focus only on being a good king, and not whether the color of his turban is the right one or the material his gara is made of. That's not what he should be worried about. He should be worried about creating a good kingdom where people thrive. So that's one position. And then others will probably disagree. The idea with the Anandpuri writings is that there's no answers given. It's about bringing all the ideas in, and then the Sikhs are to find out for themselves what kind of Raj do we want, what kind of king do we want, what kind of standards do we want to hold him up against, and so forth. So sometimes people ask me, well, what does Anandpur writing say about a Khalsa Raj? I'm like, it doesn't actually say anything, it just gives you different ideas. Then it's up for you guys to figure out what kind of Raj do you want to live under, and then you create that within the... Did that make sense? Or? Thank you. Yeah.
No, that's right. Isn't there like almost like a contradiction in sort of the contradiction in terms here, in the sense that how can we as the children of Guru Gobind Singh Ji aim for the highest of highest in terms of the sort of political scene, but also compromise our sort of Sikh values of, sort of diminishing our ego and whatnot? How do you reconcile the two?
It's an extremely good question, and I try to answer that in one of the chapters, 2 chapters, because it's a very complex topic. So I don't think I can answer that right here and right now. But the thing is that this is the reality, that if you're a humble king, your enemies are going to destroy you. So Machiavelli, if you're familiar with him, he asked the exact same question in Europe in the 1100s. He said, why is it that all the great Christian kings who are pious, who are humble, who work together with their friends and enemies, why do they only rule for 2 or 3 years until someone takes over their kingdoms? And then you have all these tyrants who are sitting on the throne for 50 years. Then he comes up with his own political answers in The Prince. This is the name of one of his books. So this is just the reality. Then the Anandpuri writings bring in these different positions, and then they have to figure out what is acceptable for us as a community, that how far can the kings go. Like, I'll talk about this elite culture in a bit. So, like I said, no answers are actually provided. Some would argue that we think a king should only focus on creating a solid Raj where the people thrive and the borders are protected. That's all I care about. Then you have another person who says, no, for me it's important that the Raja is a good role model. So he needs to follow his Nitnem, he needs to do this, he needs to like be a good role, Khalsa Sikh. So I don't really care about the other things, I need a good role model. And then there's a third position, and then the Sikhs need to figure out themselves, what do we value? Yeah. So this is what I mean, like when some people say, what is the Khalsa Raj in Anandpur Court? It actually doesn't provide the answer. It just gives you a template and gives you a discussion that you need to engage in, so you figure it out for yourself. And we'll try to do that on Sunday with the workshop. We'll bring this up. Yeah?
Do you think that Guru Gobind Singh was
Oh, there's a...
Do you think that Guru Gobind Singh was potentially preparing his Sikhs for self-governance, kind of knowing that they're going to be living a life without a living Guru soon, potentially?
Most likely, yeah. Obviously, the Guru being Antarjami, there's a lot of indications. We just step outside of that. There's a lot of indications very early on that Guru Gobind Singh is very early on preparing the Khalsa to rule themselves, to govern themselves with the Guru Granth Sahib. But only 30 years later, it is officially declared. So there's these examples that give in the book where a lot of Sangat come from the villages. They ask Guru Gobind Singh Ji a question. And then Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, go ask by Nandalal or go ask by Daya Singh this question. Go ask the court poets. Because he wants them to discuss these things internally. Guru Gobind Singh is essentially making himself, I think that's the English word. Because he wants the Sikhs to be able to stand as a sovereign community. And if you're a sovereign community, you should be able to deal with your own issues instead of... basically. And in order to do that, you need to be a cultured person, or at least your leaders need to be cultured and have some kind of education. There was a hand I missed somewhere. Yes? Would you like this?
I'm just trying to work this out because the Khalsa came up, the Gurus came and they fought oppression. The Mughals were known for oppressing their subjects, and the Mughals didn't allow the ordinary people to wear turbans, to hold their heads up high,
That's right.
to be able to own horses. There are many oppressing characteristics. So the question for me is, what are the qualities of the Khalsa Raj? That's what's coming up in my mind. So even though you've got all that historical references, literature around Raj Niti, but the Khalsa, is this who the Khalsa is? Is the Khalsa someone who oppresses people, or is the Khalsa the one who uplifts the downtrodden to give them dignity?
Very good question. So what I'll do is I'll continue my presentation because I think some of your questions will be answered then. But basically, just to put it short, so what the Sikhs are doing throughout these 25 years in the Anandpur court is that they're translating and accumulating all the knowledge of the world behind them. Then when I said they start at some point to make commentaries, so they're not just like assimilating into the ways of the world and just like blind people just taking it in. At some point they start to criticize it and comment on it and say, this works for our Raj, but we don't agree with this. So here we want to change things a little bit. I'll get into that in a few seconds. What I'm trying to say, I hope this is not the point that how it came across. I'm not trying to say that the Sikhs are just continuing the old ways. They're just continuing the old world. They are trying to create a new world, the Tisra Panth. But in order to create a new world, you need to understand what you're leaving behind. And you need to take the things that did work in the old world, you need to bring that into the new world instead of just stopping up fresh. But we'll get to that. I'll show you some examples very soon. All right, so one of the most interesting or most popular book on Raj Niti from the Anandpur court is called the Chanakya Shastra Pakka, which is written by Kavi Senapati. You might know him because he also wrote a biography of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, which is very popular and also been translated into English. You can find it for free online as a PDF. But he also wrote another book, which is called Chanakya Shastra Pakka, which is again a translation of the Chanakya Raj Niti. And Chanakya was a ancient Indian political engineer. So a lot of like the way the BJP and other works today, they're kind of following the ideas of Chanakya. So he's a very prominent political thinker. And some of the ancient Hindu quote unquote empires of history have also been inspired by his writings, similar to how Machiavelli is the main inspirator for a lot of nation states and other things here in the West. So it's interesting again that Guru Gobind Singh Ji commissioned Kavi Senapati to translate the teachings of Kavi Senapati. Sorry, he commissioned Kavi Senapati to translate the writings of Chanakya. And lucky for me, Dr. Dapinder Singh had a poti of Chanakya Shastra Pakka in his collection, so obviously I used it in the book. When I say it's popular, it's because you can trace it throughout history. A lot of later Sikh historians in the 1700s, 1800s, all the way to the 1900s have been inspired by this particular Granth. Again, just saying, it's not a book that was translated, just left on a shelf and then nobody read it. You can see throughout history that it's been recreated, even like the Bhotia in the time of Maharani Ranjit Singh. Just the fact that we have Bhotia from the time of Maharani Ranjit Singh shows that there's a demand for this Granth, so they produce it, right? Yeah, in my book I have a lot of different references, even by Maharaj Singh, who was captured by the British. They confiscated his version of the Chanakya Shastra Pakka, and you can find it in the British Library. So this is we don't really know much about it today, but it used to be a very prominent book among Sikh kings and Sikh warriors and so forth. All right, here's another quote. I'm not really sure you can read it, but just to show you like this kind of Raj Niti attitude, because Raj Niti thinking is more of an attitude. It's an approach of how you go into the world and how you deal with people in the world. Yeah. So what I'll do is that I'll try to let you read this, which I'm not sure you actually can. Can you see it? No. Can we try to change the color? It's a very important quote. So I'll do this. Is that better? Can you read it in the back? Yeah. I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. You read this and you're like, we need to leave the UK. We cannot make a living. Prices are going up. We have relatives, fair enough, but like education like costs like what, £9,000 a year, £3,000 a year? And we're not respected. There's so much discrimination. Even when I landed here a few hours ago, me and my brother got grilled at the airport with stupid questions of why we were coming here and blah, blah, blah. So all of you guys just leave the UK. This is what Chanakya says. No. Jokes aside, what you can see is that the Niti or Raj Niti attitude that Kavi Senapati is promoting here is I think you would call it no BS kind of attitude, right? Like don't put up with people who are against you, right? So do not work for an oppressive government. Do not befriend people who are deceptive. That's one thing, but do not stay in a country where you cannot make a living, do not have relatives. Again, why are you paying taxes to such a government? They're not doing anything for you. They don't respect you, they don't provide your education, blah, blah, blah. So again, the idea is don't sit there like some humble sadhu thinking, okay, I was born in this country in the Mughal India, and yeah, it's probably my karma that says I have to endure this suffering and all this opposition. It's my karma. I must have done something bad in a previous life. That's probably how some people would think back then. But Chanakya and Kavi Senapati and Raj Niti thinking says, no, like claim your rights, stand up for yourself. And then if you have a certain amount of money, give it to a government that actually does something for you, right? So this is basically a no BS kind of attitude that is being promoted amongst the Sikhs here. And a lot of these in different varieties, you can find it in the later Khalsa Rehat as well, that's being produced 20 years later. Like, don't work for the Mughals, don't greet the Mughals when you see them, they're oppressors, don't learn their languages, don't pay taxes to them, settle matters within the Panth, don't go to their magistrates, don't go to their courts, create your own court systems, and so forth. So you can kind of see the same ideals being produced in the Sikhs. So what, just to answer your question, what the Sikhs have done is that they've taken some of these ancient ideals and then say, how can we make sense of it in our own situation of where we want to go as a community? All right, I think I'll skip some of this because time is running out. But you can read about this in the book. But basically what I argue is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji has some political objectives, and you can find them in the Bajitra Natak. These verses I'm pretty sure you all know. They're often sung in Kirtan as well. During the Gurupurabs, probably will be in 2 weeks' time from now. But what I argue is that these are not warrior objectives. We see Guru Gobind Singh Ji as a warrior, so we read this as warrior objectives. But like I said, Guru Gobind Singh Ji is a political engineer. So this has to be read as a political discourse. And what I argue is that this same kind of framing was used by the Rajasthani court poets in their courts. So when the court poets and others who came from outside Punjab read these words from the Bajitra Natak, they would instantly recognize that Guru Gobind Singh Ji is making political claims here. He's not claiming to be a warrior, but this is, like I said, political discourse. We want to create a Raj in the Indo-Islamic world. What I argue further is that, because this is very, how do you say it? This is very diffused. Like, what does it mean to protect saints? How do you do that? Who are the saints? What does it mean to destroy enemies? And again, who are the enemies? So there's a lot of these things that are not really, in these verses here, they're not really explained, right? But what I argue is that the whole of the 24 avatar of Vishnu in the Dasam Granth is actually a narrative that explains these political statements of the Guru. So here in the 24 avatar, you see examples of who saints are, you see examples of how you protect them, you see examples of how to destroy the enemies, and so forth. And you do that through a story, because Guru Gobind Singh Ji loves stories, a lot of, like the Raj Niti stories and so forth. So Guru Gobind Singh could have written a treatise explaining what is these principles that we want to create a Raj after. But storytelling is much more efficient, especially for newcomers who are not familiar with intellectual ideas. So the stories of Vishnu, today we just see as Hindu writings, but these are actually explaining what is these different ideals. Yeah, and here what I've tried to do, you can find in the book, is I try to make an example of some of these different ideals that are being brought forward. So these different avatars of Vishnu come to earth, and then they bring with them a teaching of how to either protect the kingdom, create a kingdom, which laws and so forth should govern society, like what ideals should the Maharaja follow, and so forth. Time is running out. I'm very conscious of that. So take a few pictures, but even better, read it from the book. Yeah. Is it okay? I don't want to take your time. That's why. Oh, thank you. All right. So just to try to dive into it. Yeah. How many here are familiar with the 24 avatar? Very few. All right. So basically, the 24 avatar is a book in the Dasam Granth Sahib that talks about 24 incarnations of Vishnu. And again, some people have allergic reactions to this and think this is a Hindu Granth, what does Vishnu have to do with the Sikh tradition? But the idea here is that the stories of Vishnu illustrate proper political conduct. So Vishnu is here portrayed as a political agent who comes to the world to save it so many times, right? The story is, I think in English you call it circular. So there's a threat on earth, the gods approach Vishnu, this is mythology, so the gods approach Vishnu, who manifests on earth as an avatar with a specific methods to eradicate this threat. Sometimes it's about demons who are causing havoc on earth, and the demons need help for that. Afterwards, when Vishnu has come down to earth to save it, the people thrive under a Dharmic Raja until a new calamity affects them. And so the circle continues. So it's circular in the sense that there's a problem, the gods come up to Vishnu and say, please help us, the demons are causing problems on earth. Then Vishnu solves the problem, then there's happiness on earth for a certain amount of years, and then the demons are back on the sea, right? Does that make sense? This is a 400-page Granth as well. It's a very simplified way of saying it. So these 24 different avatars that come down to basically deal with a specific kind of problem. These are the ones: Mach, Kach, Nar, Narayan, Bhavan, Parsuram, Brahma, Arhan, Krishna, Ram, and Kalki Avatar, and so forth. Now, instead of getting allergic reactions and thinking this is Hindu gods and so forth, let's actually look at what is the story, what is the problem that is affecting humans, and how does Vishnu actually solve it. And what you will see is that sometimes the problem is solved militarily, but in many other cases, it's actually not solved militarily, it's solved through intellect. Yeah, and I try to show that throughout these different charts. So let me give you an example. So Arhant here, right? So this is an example where the demons, after having been destroyed many, many times, they realize that again, this is mythology. So they realize that if the demons take on Dharam, they start to follow Vedic Dharam, do the rituals and all these things, then they acquire a lot of power. They acquire a lot of power through the Vedic rituals, right? So the demons are starting to adopt Dharam, but they manipulate Dharam to their own evil ways, right? So you have evil people exploiting Dharam and rechanging it for their own purposes. The gods are horrified because they see that the demons are changing the Dharam, right? So they go up to Vishnu and says, what do we do? What Vishnu then does is that he manifests on earth as Arhant, and then Arhant manifests himself as the Jain founder and spreads Jainism on earth amongst the demons. And as you know, Jainism is a very passive religion, pacifist religion. It is very different from ancient Hinduism. So the idea is basically that by spreading a new faith amongst the demons, they're lured away from Dharam, thereby their powers are being decreased. And in that sense, the gods are winning again. Does that make sense? Now the problem here is that it's a paradox because, like I say here, enemies who exploit Dharam for their own benefit can be overcome by manipulating the culture and thereby weaken their powers. Here's the thing. The promotion of Adharam can be employed to promote Dharam. So what the teaching is that, sounds very radical, promoting falsehood can also actually be done in order to protect the truth. To keep certain people away from religion, it's okay if you can protect the truth that way. And just to say, this is actually eternal teachings. That if you spread falsehood amongst, or you change the culture of your enemies, you can weaken them. So what you see in the Cold War, just to use an example from there, what you saw is that you had two grand powers up against each other, the West and the Soviet Russia. And what happened is that the Americans, they knew they couldn't defeat, like the gods here, they can't defeat the demons because they have more power than them. The Americans knew that they couldn't defeat Soviet Russia militarily. What they did instead is that they tried to promote Americanism and Western culture amongst the Russians. You heard about this, right? So Americanism, McDonald's, Hollywood, all these things. Because if they did that, they would widen the gap between the Russian, Soviet, communist elites and the people, the subjects of the country. So by dividing that gap, making it bigger, eventually Soviet Russia would collapse, right? So here you're changing the culture of your enemy in order to weaken them and to make them collapse. And modern example is how China is using TikTok. This is not, they've done studies of this, not just propaganda. How China is using TikTok in the West to make people dumb. Like they've done studies that show that the algorithm in the West, what children are exposed to is just time waste. They're not learning anything. They're just becoming dumber and more addicted to the screen. They lose their ability to concentrate and focus. Even us, we suffer from that. But the same TikTok in China is very different. The algorithm makes you smarter. It makes you learn things about the world, about different subjects and so forth. So what you can see here is that the Chinese are basically doing what Arhant Avatar teaches. The Chinese are trying to change the ways of the Americans in order to weaken them, in order for them to have their civilization collapse. So I don't know if any of this made any sense, but what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these teachings that you find in the 24 Avatar, firstly, they're political teachings, but they're eternal teachings as well. You see all of I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say 80% of this is still playing out in modern geopolitics in the Western world. Does that make sense? Great. All All right. I've taken up too much time. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah.
Being from Denmark, where do you see outside of this land, where do you see where we are also outside of this? Have you learned all these things?
So this is why we're doing this twofold. So there's going to be a workshop on Sunday so that we can dive more into that. So, because I think there's a lot we actually can learn. A lot of the things from especially the Dasam Granth, but also the wider Anandpuri writings, it's eternal teachings. Is right there for Sikhs to tap into and then figure out how do we make sense of this for us today. It's not like a library, it's not a museum. You just go there and this is how it looked back then. Look at the grand Sikhs of ancient times, and then you sit there and feel empowered by watching how your ancestors were empowered. No, this is action-oriented literature. Remember us talking about the doors and the mirrors? So it's here to make you do things in your own lifetime differently. Yeah, transformative literature. But this is why when we're talking about, when we planned this session today, we need to do it in two parts. One is just the lecture, so to speak. The other one is how do you make sense of it? Living in London 2024. All right. Like I said, this is just going to be very quick. So what we see is that after the Sikhs have studied, now I'm going to answer your question as well. After the Sikhs have studied these ancient Sanskrit, Persian writings, the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world for 20 years, eventually we begin to see commentaries on existing writings and original works that challenge the earlier philosophies. So the Sikhs are translating this stuff and saying some of it works, but some of it we outright disagree with, and we are not going to continue this. But what they then do is that they start to make alternatives. They start to create their own products. And this is where you see the Gobind Gita, the Prem Sumarag, the Adhyatma Prakash, the Hitupdesha, Stik, and so forth. So now they're trying to make, even the Khalsa Rahat to some extent, they're trying to make sense of how can we use this for our own benefit. And what I argue in my book is that eventually the Guru wants his followers to establish one or more Sikh kingdoms in the Indo-Islamic world. So this is just, obviously, kingship or monarchy, that was the only known form of governance back then in the ancient world. So even like sometimes today people say, why did Maharaj Singh create a monarchy? Well, that was how things were back then. This is the only form of governance that was really known. And a lot of the writings that the Sikhs were studying in the Anandpur code were about kingship, classical elitist kingship. So, but what the Khalsa Sikhs did was that they took all this ancient knowledge from the Mughals and others, and then they created a book called the Prem Sumarag, where they start to dissect what things do we want to continue with. And what I argue in my book in the 9th or 10th chapter is that they create a new organization of a Khalsa government. It's still a monarchy, but you have, like you see, the ruler, you have the prime minister, then you have the governors in the distant provinces, you have the army general, and so forth. And then in the provinces, you have a different organization, into towns, cities, districts, intelligence services, how the army, how is taxation happening, blah, blah, blah. Now, here's the interesting thing, just to answer your question. One thing that sets the Prem Sumarag apart from all the classical Sanskrit and Hindu and even Muslim writings is that it does not give the Maharaja impunity. So in the Islamic world, the Khalifa cannot be punished. He's like God's shadow on earth, so he cannot be punished. In the Hindu tradition, in the Qurans that are being translated, that Raja is a manifestation of Vishnu. So he's outside the realm of society. So he cannot be punished even if he makes any crimes. This privilege is not given to the Maharaja and the Khalsa Raj. So, it very meticulously says that there's a checks and balances here, that even the Maharaja is under the law, and if he commits, or his brothers or his family or anyone else commits a crime, then you have this judge here who can punish him. And if he summons the Maharaja, he has to show up. So can you see here? This is unprecedented. This is not seen in any writings before that. So the Khalsa are not just repeating like parrots earlier writings that we're just going to continue the old ways, just replace the rulers with Sikhs and then we'll just continue the old ways. We're going to make it our own. So yeah, this is just one example. I give 2 or 3 others in the book. Yeah, one of the discussions they had was elite culture. Because again, the purpose was not just to go into to basically assimilate oneself into the rotten ways of the world, but actually to elevate yourself from it. So one of the discussions was, well, the Sikhs are going to become the new elites in the Indo-Islamic world, so we are going to take on some of their trades and habits, but where do we draw the line? So here's one example here from the Prem Sumar I talked about before. So here it basically says the written language, all vidya, all knowledge, all government documents should be written in the Gurmukhi script. This is an affront to the existing ways back then, because everything was written in the Arabic script. Even in the time of Maharaji Singh, they did not necessarily follow this. But there was a position in Anandpur Court saying, we're not just going to continue the old ways of the world and continue writing in Persian, because this is how it's been done for 1,000 years. We're going to write in Gurmukhi because we are Sikhs. So that was one position in the Anandpur Court. Another position was that we need to also make ourselves familiar. Other kingdoms need to recognize our authority. So we need to continue some things. One of them being we continue the Persian script. So some of those who've seen Sikh coins, I think there are some Sikh coins here as well. You've noticed that the Sikh coins are in Farsi, right? Have you seen that? So Maharaji Singh's coins were written in Farsi, right? So the argument for doing that and not just to replace it with Gurumukhi, the argument was that if we make a Sikh coinage in Gurumukhi, no other countries are going to trade with us because they don't understand our currency. So we're going to ruin the international economy of the Khalsa Raj because we need a currency that they're interested in trading with us. So it was very easy to just say all the coins should be in Gurumukhi script. Yeah, that's good, but no one's going to do any trading with you, right? It's the same with if you start creating a new currency today. Nobody's going to find it interesting apart from us in this room. So that position in the Anandpur Code said, or like later on said, no, we continue the Persian script so that we can be taken seriously by outsiders. And then slowly by slowly we'll insert Gurumukhi onto the scripts. But it has to be done progressively so we don't erupt and interrupt the international economy of Punjab. Yeah, so what you see, especially in Kashmir and in Multan and Peshawar, in the Afghan territories, is that the Sikh coins that were produced there eventually over time started to get like Gurumukhi symbols on them. So if the Sikh empire hadn't collapsed, maybe 50 years later or 20 years later, they probably would have become Sikh coins fully. But it happened slowly by slowly. All right. Yeah. Great, this is the conclusion. So the Sikhs back then, they're tapping into existing knowledge and discuss them in Sikh centers of learning. Then these texts are used to empower Sikhs and their institutions. And overall, Guru Gobind Singh Ji nurtures an atmosphere of intellectual activity and competition among his followers. Take the knowledge from the world around you and then see how can you advance your own institutions by doing this. And what I argue is that basically the Missals and the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Empire, they continue that kind of culture amongst themselves. If any of this was interesting, there's a few books that are for sale today. A lot of them have been reserved, but hopefully there's still a few more that people can buy. Today, there's about a 43% discount. Otherwise, you can find it on Amazon for this. It's on sale there quite often as well. Everything I said is backed up with the sources and everything in that book. Yes?
So, in general, we go back to the era of 15th century to 18th century. There was no formal education of like engineering, physics, periodic tables, chemistry. The only source of education was all this Raj Niti and other things. So it was not just limited to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. It was right from before Guru Gobind Singh. They want the kids to get educated, to know what's going around the world. Doesn't matter what knowledge. Like here we learn about computer science, all this chemistry, this subject. At that time, the only source of knowledge was that one. So I would not refrain in Guru Gobind Singh's time period. I would go with beyond that time period as well. Because source of knowledge and the books written by that time, by those authors, whether they're in Kashi or they were anywhere else, those were the source of knowledge. And that's the reason those ones were teach in Guru's times as well. So I would not limit this just to Guru Gobind Singh's time. That is my overall understanding about this.
I'm not saying Guru Gobind Singh Ji did anything unique in this. Yeah.
We do Padesha, and also even today also we learn in India also different form of Bhalmati, other states.
Yeah, exactly.
We learn that. That's coming from all these Hitu Padeshas. We are learning those even in today's class as well. There's no harm in getting a knowledge of beyond that. So just want to add that thought.
Yeah, it's a very good comment. The thing is that I work historically, so I take the historian's approach, and it's just much easier to argue this case from the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji onwards, because we have all the manuscripts, the potiyas, and the sources. I hope someone else will pick up the mantle and continue it and extend it even further back in time with the earlier gurus, because I'm pretty sure you can also create a similar history. But I started with Guru Gobind Singh Ji onwards.
I just want to add, we were all part of those school sector in the northern area, and we were learning those educations. And this was limited that time to the Brahmins. It was not limited to Shudras. So that's the reason the whole education was limited to the upper caste living. And the kids of those parents that time, they want to learn this education. And this is part of the whole education system. And that time, everyone, I'm not saying Sikhs, everyone was learning the same syllabus. So I was not just thinking Sikhs were learning this, everybody was learning this.
Yeah, probably, yeah. My scope is just obviously very narrow on the Sikhs, but yeah. But I also do talk about like Mughal curriculum. This is also why I said like this was the imperial curriculum of the time. So obviously there's an element of wider society there as well. But thank you for bringing that out. Yes. Do we have time for questions, or should we? I feel like I've just been talking for ages and taken over the whole program. Yes, the end there.
So open questions, anyone? Just pass the microphone.
Yes.
Baji, is this a question about concept of like the Guru being antarjami, and then but also needing to have like that concept of they know everything, but they've also brought people in. I think there was a slide that talked about they had to study, and like I sort of think like, are we pitching perhaps the Guru as something that they're not? And that's kind of what I got from it. Just like this, how do you reconcile that? The idea that they know everything, but they also bring people in to teach, but could they not teach themselves if they knew? Like, how do we? Are we sort of pitching the Guru maybe historically, like incorrectly, perhaps, or all the Gurus in that regard?
It's an interesting question. If you look at the old writings from the 1700s, there is the idea that Guru is antarjami, the Guru is all-knowing, but at the same time they're also saying these were the teachers of the Guru and these were the influences, and so there's no contradiction here between these two things. But it's a longer discussion on the nature of the Guru and so forth. So it's a bit more tricky to answer that. The idea is also that the Guru avatar that comes down needs to set the example of how to manifest dharma in Kaljuk, and by doing so, they need to show these different attributes that are needed to succeed. One of them being intellectual curiosity. So the Guru needs to manifest that for his followers to see as well, because the followers are not antarjami. So there's an element of that as well. The same thing with how did the Gurus learn Shastra Vidya? Like they were also, you see the names of the teachers who taught the Guru, like Baba Buddha and so forth. You could also exactly use the same. Why did they need to learn it? Didn't they already know? They did, but they also had to show the Sikhs this is the intellectual curiosity you need, and that is a hard work you need to put in to master Shastra Vidya and so forth. So it's a double-edged sword, if that makes sense. But it's this is a very short one. There's a much longer answer that's,
Thank you so much, Satnam Paji, for your talk. Just a quick question. You make...
Sorry, who's talking?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there.
The way you present your material in your book and even in your presentation, it makes it seem as if it was very easy to get all of this information. It seems like it was very accessible. What was the biggest struggle for you in the journey of your research in general, but also in writing this book, in getting access to all this information? What was your biggest struggle?
I mean, I'm intrigued to hear that you say that it looks like it was very easy, because it was everything apart from easy. So my own journey was that I didn't know how to read Gurumukhi, so I had to teach myself how to read Gurumukhi. And then I needed to acquire all these different books from India throughout many, many years. I bought some in Southall, actually, in Sikh Missionary Society as well. And then I had to make sense of it. Like, one thing is now I can read the script, I can read the books as well, but how do I make sense of it? How does this apply and add to all the other knowledge that we already know of, and how does it differ? So it was it was like a big puzzle for me to figure out how do I make sense of this. Then later on, I started to teach myself on Punjab Teacher Library how to read manuscripts. And then I was very privileged in 2020, I think it was, by Dr Dapinder Singh to be able to read the manuscripts, not just on a computer screen on Punjab Teacher Library, but actually see them in front of me, and then to sit there and study them, and again to see not just the manuscripts themselves, but also how are these being used by later generations. So I'm glad to hear you say that it looks very easy, because it was very difficult. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question there.
Two questions I have. So first one is, slip my mind now. I remember the second one. So the second one was, what is the most sort of, what's the biggest curveball that you came across whilst doing your research? What was something that you uncovered that was unexpected? And had you had more time, and if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
That's a very good question. I think one of the biggest insights was the consistency of Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Like, this is not just like a one-off thing that takes place for 1 or 2 years. The Guru is very pooling resources into this. A lot of money are pooled into this, and it happens consistently for 25 years. Like I said in the beginning, try to think back, where were you 25 years ago? This is of how long of a period Guru Gobind Singh Ji was invested in this for the sake of culturally educating his own followers. So that was for me like, wow, it just goes on, and it's like, this is really something the Guru is invested in. For me, very inspirational as well. What else could I go into? I think what would be interesting was, I just focused on the Raj Niti Granths, so the political writings, but could you do a similar exercise with the writings that dealt with mysticism or spirituality? Because like I said, there were so many books, like how would that history look like then? Or any other topic, institution building, how Guru Gobind Singh Ji is making his Sikhs build institution. The Khalsa is an institution, and so forth. The Anandpur court is an institution. So what was the learning curve for the Sikhs to start doing that? For me, I think that would be very interesting, to write a new history about these things. One thing I always say is that Sikhs are very good at creating projects. A project is something that lasts for 1-2 years, often a one-man army project, one person with a zeal, and then they receive a lot of shitstorms online, or they receive a lot of opposition, then they kind of die out and they don't want to do it anymore. After 1 or 2 years, the project dies out. Sikhs are very good as a community, I think better than most communities, at creating projects. Something that lasts for 1 or 2 years, but we're not good at creating institutions. And institution is the opposite. It lasts for many, many years. And even if there's a shitstorm or there's like a opposition happening, they don't really lose track of where they're heading, because now it's an idea that nurtures. It's not that one person, the one man project. And what we see, like I said, with Guru Gobind Singh Ji is that he's creating institutions. So even with the Khalsa, the Mughals tried to finish the Khalsa off, but that was not possible, because the idea was inside the mind of every single Sikh. So even if you destroyed Anandpur, the Khalsa is still flourishing, because the Khalsa is not in that particular building. The Akal Takht in itself is an institution. Even though if you knock down the Akal Takht still exists in the mind of the people, hence they will continue it. So writing a new history, it is very nerdy about it. Writing a history about the institution building of the Gurus and how they're building institutions would be very helpful for Sikhs today, because we're really good at creating projects, but they just die out after 2 years. I did a podcast with Basics of Sikhi, that'll be out 2 weeks, and we talk more about this thing with institution building. Yeah. I don't think necessarily it was lost, because like I said, the idea is in the minds of the Sikhs now. So my next book, which I'm working on now, is after the Anandpur court, what happens then with the Sikh intellectual tradition. What I kind of show is that the Sikhs are continuing it. Because even though the Anandpur was destroyed, it had become an institution in the minds of the people. So the Sikhs just dispersed, went into different villages and went to other cities, and they continued in the same vein. So that created the Nirmalas, the Sevapanthis, and these different the Gyani tradition, because it was an institution. So you could finish off, you could destroy the buildings of Anandpur, but it doesn't mean the Anandpur court is dead, because it's still in the minds of the people. So it wasn't finished off. It just continues, just in a new fashion, going from centralized to now being decentralized. Yeah.
Sorry, I hope I can speak loudly. I was really following on from a question asked back there, that around the time that this sort of socio-political education may have been happening in other institutes as well. But I would think or assume that this was more egalitarian, because the distinction between Sikhs, especially Guru Gobind Singh Sikhs, and the Hindus was that the Brahmins could have access, but nobody else could. This is why it was important to have Gurmukhi. It was important to have this kind of institute, so we could then say everybody's welcome. Would you agree that that was the case?
Yeah. This is one thing that also in later history, which I'll touch upon, is that what happens is that all of a sudden the Sikhs start to have the same Vidya in Sanskrit as the Pandits and the Brahmins used to have, but they're not recognized for their Vidya because most of them came from lower castes. So there's this conflict that lasts for 200 years where the Sikhs have the Vidya, but they're not granted access to the same institutions in Benares and in Kashmir and so forth. So what do the Sikhs do? Because they can match them intellectually, but they can't gain access. And you see, there's a lot of terrible stories about how Sikhs are being punished and their manuscripts are being destroyed by the Brahmins of Benares and so forth. Because Sikh education is very egalitarian. And even the British recorded this in the late 1800s as well. The education is open for everyone, basically. And it was also meant, there's an element of that I talk about in the second chapter as well, that Guru Gobind Singh Ji also said that one day my Sikhs will teach the Brahmins Sanskrit. Like, I will subvert the whole system. I will make these students teachers one day. But yeah.
And do you think we are getting there, or have we moved away from that? Are we conscious of that?
I think we've moved away from it. Like, I don't think there's but I think it's also very natural. Like, Sikhs are not really prizing Sanskrit that much anymore, because Sanskrit is not the lingua franca of intellectual discourse anymore. So if you want to, back then, if you wanted to write something intellectual, you had to do it in Sanskrit for other scholars to accept it. Now the lingua franca of intellectual discourse is English. So if you want something published, you do it in English in an international journal. So in that sense, we have kind of gotten away from the whole Sanskrit ization, and now we're looking more towards participating in the English world of science and so forth. But I think Sikhs could still participate more. We'll talk more about that on Sunday in the workshop. I think it's possible for Sikhs to punch above their weight like the Jews have. There's a lot of potential, but it still needs to be nurtured. I don't know if I answered your question. Oh, sorry, there's a question behind you, sorry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's not necessary that has to be a class system again. Education was available for the person who want to be here.
No, you're right, but I think these are exceptions. They're not. This is not how it was for everyone back then.
But there are people who were learning those education. That's the example. These are examples. There are light people, but there are many people who were learning at that time.
Yeah. No, true. Yeah.
Thank you. Just want to apply some of the questions to yourself. So from where you started on this journey 10, 15 years ago to where you are today, having learned and come across the manuscripts you have and read what you have you got any examples how you changed or evolved, how you apply yourself in day-to-day reality, where you would have maybe done something sadhu style in the past and then you kind of subverted it with a dharam in the present or something like that?
It's interesting because I've reflected upon this over many years. Like, why am I interested in this? That's obviously very personal, but why am I interested in this whole niti aspect of life? I think in my own private life, I have encountered at work and in school and stuff that having a humble, I'm not sitting here saying I'm a sadhu or anything, but like having more of a humble attitude and approach doesn't really get you that far. People are going to walk all over you in the workplace or in school, going to take credit for your work and these things. So I think this is why I was interested in this niti thing from the Anandpur court, because I could see that in my own life it didn't really work out always. Sometimes it also did work out quite well. I think one of the things I have taken with me from the Anandpur court, and I'm just repeating myself, is this intellectual curiosity, and just be consistent in it. And you need to nurture it. It's not there. This is why I emphasized before, like even like these were not sevadars who were working for the group; they were paid money for it. So we need to also, as Sikhs, create a culture where we pay each other money to reward them for the effort that they've put in, whether they're painters or they're this and that. So like this idea of patronage, for instance. So I have done that previously. I will do that more. But like this idea of patronage, you have people with skills. You need to not reward them in that sense, but you need to nurture it in them to continue with their vidya and their skill. Obviously, for those of you who know me, I work for a government. I work for the Danish government. We're very close to the minister's office, so a lot of the work I do is based on Raj Niti. I'm not a politician, obviously, but I work in a political system. So in that sense, some of this I see on a daily basis. So in that sense, I can kind of navigate the world of politics, how to create change for obviously the betterment of Danish society and so forth. Yeah, I'll think more about it. It's a very good question.
Just second question about one of the poets, Bhai Nandlal Ji. Did he become Bhai Nandlal Singh Ji, and what happened to him afterwards? Obviously, he never fought in the battles, but yeah, just a question that I had recently come up in my own mind.
Yeah, so Bhai Nandlal, there's this trend today to say Bhai Nandlal Singh, because
I've never heard that.
Yeah, but
you
can find it in
Bahul, or did he receive Bahul, or did he? Well, we don't really know.
There's one tradition by Pyara Singh Badam, who wrote in Punjabi. He doesn't put a source on it, but it's very beautiful. But it says that one day, Guru Gobind Singh Ji asked Bhai Kanhaiya and Bhai Nandlal to present themselves because the Khalsa had been created. So they showed up with hukamnamas were sent out. Everyone should come and take poll. And then they came with weapons on them. And then Guru Gobind Singh asked them, "What are you doing? Why have you put on the sword?" And then Bhai Nandlal said, "You asked people to come and say Khande di pole." And he's like, "No, but you have to do it with the kalam, with the pen. Your amrit will be with the pen." So that's a story that some people are not meant to be warriors. They were supposed to be poets. And the same with Bhai Kanhaiya, who's not supposed to fight on the battlefield, but to serve the people on the battlefield. So he was given an amrit with a barta, not a barta, with a dig. Yeah. But I don't know, there's no source for these stories. They're quite beautiful, but there's no source provided for them. But I think the general idea is that Bhai Nandlal had taken Charan Amrit before 1699, but he did not take Khande di pole afterwards. I think the obsession of who did he take or not is a very modern obsession. Like there's one way of being a Sikh, and that's about it. Back then, yeah. The grey zones, exactly, yeah. Because back then taking Amrit was also a lot about military duty. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, one of the things that is often observed in contemporary Sikhi is the lack of unity. And there are paradoxes in terms of who we are and the mixed messages that go out from within the Band about who we are and how we define ourselves. What's your vision in terms of creating the kind of Khalsa institution / government that will align with the Guru's vision?
I'm not really sure I have an answer for that. I think I would be very happy to kickstart a conversation about this so other people discuss it. I don't think I'm the one who has the answers for that. So I think this is also what we're going to try to do on Sunday. We're going to take these principles and then see how do we make sense of it. How can we make sense of it in the modern living world. But like I said, I don't think I'm the right one to answer it. I'll be happy to kickstart a conversation about it and put a framework up of discussion and principles of discussion and debate, but not necessarily provide any answers. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I'm still working for the Danish government. So this was a hobby of mine. So I was doing it when I was not at work. Then I was writing or researching for this book. So again, it's going to be in the podcast that's coming out with Basic Sikh in 2 weeks. I'll go more into that, with how did I set about writing the book. But basically, I grew up in Denmark. There's very little Sikh community there, and I wasn't taught Punjabi, and apart from speaking Punjabi at home, but I wasn't taught like formally Punjabi when I was growing up. So I didn't know how to read Gurumukhi either. The focus for Danish Sikhs has primarily been to learn Danish and do well in schools, so we don't get bullied, and obviously we can get good jobs and so forth. So when I was like 20, I think like 16, I had my first identity crisis. Like I could see, this is very lame way of saying it, but I could see a lot of my other Indian friends, they knew how to watch Bollywood films and they understood the Hindi there, and I didn't understand what they were saying, so that stressed me out. It really stressed me out. Like I don't understand. I'm failing my community. I'm failing my identity as an Indian boy. So I had an identity crisis there. Then I turned to Sikhi, but I didn't know Gurumukhi at this time. And Sikhi back then was before social media and everything. So it was very shallow kind of Sikhi. But the more I started studying and reading, I found out there's an intellectual side to Sikhi. There's a lot of things that are not written in the English language. And the kind of Sikhi that you represented in English language is very different from the one you find in the Punjabi books. And I knew that because the Katha I heard was not similar to what I found in the English world. The Katha was much more deep. So obviously that was by listening to it, right? So that gave me the emphasis and the motivation to teach myself Gurumukhi through Google, basically. I found this book and then I taught myself and tried to, like, letter by letter. I think when I was 24 or something, I kind of knew how to read it. And then after that, it kind of kicked off because now I had opened the whole world of literature for me. And I could basically see a lot of stuff we find in the Punjabi writings is not to be found in the English world yet. So this is what I try to pull out in the book and try as much as possible to, like, show that the Sikhi that you find in Punjabi is not the one you find in English, and we need to align them much more in the academic world in particular. But I'll talk more about that in the podcast. Yeah. I've been speaking so much.
Sorry about that. It's fine. What an amazing afternoon we've had. What a fantastic. I think we owe him a round of applause, yeah? So I know the time has flown, as it usually does when something's really interesting. And I'm well known for, taking my talks well above 2 hours at a time when I launched the Khalsa camps in 1990s. So I'm going to keep it extremely brief and, in fact, ask you to ask me questions and things about the Pothiyan because they're more interesting than what I am. Just a bit of background. Mera naam hai Dapinder Singh, and I'm known as Dr. D. I am a GP, and I qualified in Nottingham in the late 1980s and so on. And so my love for collecting Sikh artifacts and stuff goes back into the 1980s, or actually at the beginning of 1980s, and I met an amazing, legendary guy called Dr Chanakya Singh you might have heard of from Coventry. He was a man beyond his years, and he had the bakshish of a guru from his ancestors that they had been collecting and so on. And the guy had stuff that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. I befriended him, he trusted me. He was paranoid about his stuff. He wouldn't let go of his package or a suitcase where he had the grunts in and the Pothiyan because he's frightened that people would steal them. And they did, because he used to exhibit the stuff at the gurdwaras and people used to steal his manuscripts and stuff. So he used to ask me, can you stand here? Can you do this and all that? This was way back in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. So he inspired me, and I befriended him, befriended his family, and sooner or later I started sort of accumulating my own stuff from him. And the majority of the manuscripts that I have actually come from his collections. That he died some 20 years ago, and his wife and his sons kindly, we have kept our dosti for all this time, and I would say that the majority of what he had I have now. And he accumulated it from his ancestors and so on, predecessors. So as a doctor and stuff, but having an interest in anything to do with Sikhi. So this is probably a quarter of the pothia that I have. These are 17 pothias here, but I have probably 50 more at home, including handwritten Guru Granth Sahib, handwritten Dasam Granth, and so on and so on. And 20, 30 years ago, I came across a Dasam Granth from Pakistan. It was in a terrible, terrible way, eaten away by rodents, fungus growing everywhere. It was soiled by mud and so on, and water damage. I gave it to a woman called Anne Marie from the British Library. She took on the project. I said, can you fix this? Can you restore this? And back 30 years ago, it would have now cost about 30,000, 40,000 pounds to restore it. And so the money that I had as a student there, I remember you probably know my brother Teji Singh, who's a Gatka master. So he used to go around doing Gatka at different gurdwaras, and the money that came through that way, we used to collect that and then put it towards this, because nobody wanted to donate. Nobody wants to pay a penny for anything to be preserved, unfortunately, in our community. They all want it, but they don't want to preserve it, and they don't want to put something towards it because it doesn't belong to them. I want it. I'll only do it if I have it. So this is the sad part of our community. And I was sitting and thinking, all of this knowledge and stuff, and I'm thinking Anandpur Sahib and so much knowledge and all that. What have we learned? And I don't want to be controversial, Satnam, but I mean, what have we learned? After all of this, after all of that, after all the sacrifices, everything that has come by, what on earth have we learned as a community? Right? It just goes beyond, thinking of what have we learned. Sikh reference library. I remember when the Kalukara happened, Dr. Chand came crying to me. He goes, Dapinder se lutte gaye, mare gaye, sara kuch kharab ho gaya, khatam ho gaya. To main kyu hai? He said, oh, Sikh reference library, ag lagati, ho gaya, ye ho gaya. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go into the politics of it. I don't want to go into who said what and who did what where. But come on, guys, knowing that this kind of thing was happening, it's going to happen. I was there in 1984 in India. I was there at Vaisakhi in Amritsar, 1984. I was there at the Ranswai Akhand Kirtan Jatha. I was taking the photographs. All the photographs that you see of the Kirtan happening in Vaisakhi, I took all those photographs, of even by Janal Singh Ji and all that. A lot of them got stolen. As I've said before, people like to steal things, right? So knowingly that we have allowed these things to happen, countless handwritten manuscripts belonging to the gurus as well have all disappeared, right? We don't actually know whether they got burnt. We don't know. I've read a couple of books on the subject and stuff. They say, yes, definitely, it's all gone. We have eyewitnesses there who can categorically say that the Sikh reference library was burnt and stuff, and everything was burnt. We saw the burnt relics and stuff. Whereas other people are arguing that actually, that was a smokescreen, and actually they've all been preserved, they've been given away, they've been stolen, and they've been sold on the black market. And Holly, you do see some things coming around. You do see them. I'm in that field. And you do get people ringing around from India and all that and say, yes, and I'm thinking, where did you get that from? Where did you get that from? Where does that come from 30 years later, 40 years later? I'm digressing. So enough to say that it's taken 40 years of my life to accumulate this amount of works here that you can see. And, recently I came across this manuscript, which is by Mani Singh's Gyan Ratnavali. So Bhai Mani Singh Ji is known, the history says that he wrote the life story of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, because the Sikhs came up to him and said, oh, the Bhai Bala di Janam Sakhi, the stories about Guru Nanak, they're all false, they're all putting Guru Nanak Dev Ji in a bad way and so on. We want you to rewrite the life history of Guru Nanak Dev Ji in a proper Gurmat way. And can you redo the life story of Guru Nanak Dev Ji? And it says that Bhai Mani Singh said, okay, Jari Bhai Gurdas Ji Barane, that Bhai Gurdas Ji wrote about Guru Nanak Dev Ji. I will translate Bhai Gurdas Ji's first war, which is all about Guru Nanak Dev Ji. That will be the Janam Sakhi of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So here we have a copy, the full copy, handwritten, of Bhai Mani Singh Ji's Gyan Ratnavali. And it's fascinating. I knew about it, but I didn't actually read it and stuff. And I started reading this one, so I couldn't stop. I got a hold of it. And once you start opening one of this, you will be there for hours. Because, first of all, it's all written in old Gurmukhi. Then the handwriting is different, for each scribe. And so you've got to adjust your eyesight to that handwriting, and this sasa is like this, and the jajja is like this, and the lala is like this, and you keep thinking, what is this? Which letter is this? So I started reading, I picked this up, and we usually look at the front and the back because we want to see if there's a date on it, and this one has a date. This one has a date as well. It's written in 1862, this one. So it's been preserved almost completely untouched. And so I've probably read a quarter of it already one night. I was there from 7 o'clock at night till 2 o'clock in the morning. My wife's like, where are you? Where are you? From bringing me on the phone. Where are you? I said, I'm still in my office. I'm in my room. She goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm just reading. She goes, okay, sonani? So you get addicted to these things when you start reading it. But what I found fascinating, each pothi has something fascinating. To me, it's like, oh my God, somebody, 200 years ago wrote this, sat there and wrote this. And there is only one pothi like this in the whole world. You can pick plenty of Karpana and Talwara and Khande and all that. There's many of them. But this is only one of a kind. And it's on paper and ink, and somebody has taken the time to write something. It's that knowledge in there. And remember also, okay, ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਹਾਂ, but ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਕੀ ਹੈ? ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈ ਗੁਰੂ. ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਪੋਥੀ ਪਰਮੇਸ਼ਰ ਕਾ ਥਾਨ. So in the Guru Granth Sahib, there is a line which says pothi, that the book is where God resides. In other words, Guru Granth Sahib, pothi Sahib, it used to be called pothi Sahib. The Ad Granth, which Guru Arjan Dev Ji wrote, it used to be called pothi Sahib. And Guru Arjan Dev Ji wrote ke pothi parmeshwar ka than, ke God's place resides within that shabad, within that pothi. And these are all pothiyan, with some of them with Gurbani in it, or the translations of Gurbani in it. These are to be preserved and respected. Our history is nothing. We are nothing without these pothiyan. We are nothing without the Shabad. As a community, we reserve the word Shabad for the Guru and God. Ke Rab vi Shabada. So, Vahu Vahu Bani. What is Bani? God is, Guru Sahib saying ke Nirankar is Bani. Vahu Vahu Bani Nirankar hai. Right? God himself is manifested in the Shabad of the Bani. So, to preserve these pothiyan, to have them, is like, oh my God. And when Satnam rang me, during COVID time, and I said, who are you? They came from Denmark. I don't know you. They want to come and see your stuff and all that. How do you know I've got the stuff? I was a bit paranoid, who this guy wants to come around my house, especially during COVID and all that. All right. Why? Has been nearly 30 years. Not a single person in the Sikh community around the world has ever called me and said, I'm interested in your pothia. You don't exist. Satnam Singh is the only person in the last 40 years who has ever bothered to come and say, I want to see one of your pothi and read it because I'm doing research on it. To me, it was like they don't exist. People like Satnam don't exist. As a community, we don't exist, right? We have been led historically for centuries into a days of sleepy people, and bas kar lo in Karam Kand and stuff, do this, do that, yes, do this way, kara athe pao, gatra athe pao, dadi adda rakho, bas that's all we're interested in denominations and this and that and Karam Kand and all that. Our intellectualism has disappeared. Our intellectuals has disappeared. You asked about who was Guru Gobind Singh Ji's teachers. Of course, our gurus weren't born knowing how to ride a horse and how to write Sanskrit and all that. You don't be so dumb, man. This is not what we are saying. Guru Sahib is Antarjami. Yes, of course he's Antarjami. But he doesn't sit there thinking, I know everything, I know what's going to happen, this and that, so therefore I don't even need to exist then, is it? Ji sab kuch pata hai, sab kuch hona hai, ye, wo, this and that. That is not what Sikhi is. That's not what Guru Sahib is saying about Antarjami and all that. If he wishes to be Antarjami, he can be. But he doesn't go sit there and thinking, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're thinking. Well, if that's the case, what's the point of कि तुम्हें अरदास कर? नाले गुरु से कहने अरदास करो, आ करो, जो थोड़ा सारा कुछ पता है, सामने अरदास करने दी लोड़ ही नहीं हैगी. Do you understand? We're being stupid. Yeah, we're being really stupid. That is not how it is. Guru Gobind Singh Ji had teachers. Our gurus and our jade vadene, they all had teachers. Guru Gobind Singh, their teachers was Qazi Pir Muhammad, taught him Persian. Qazi Pir Muhammad and Pandit Hardas Ji, they taught him Sanskrit and stuff. And then there was Pai Sahib Chand and Pai Mati Das Ji from Guru Tegh Bahadur's time taught them Gurmukhi. There were many, many teachers, people who spent years with the gurus teaching them. And we've been dumbed down by these pracharaks, and we've been dumbed down. No, Guru Sahib nu sab kuch pata hai, sanu sara kuch pata hai, we've been dumbed down. That is not the case. We need people like Satnam. We need people like you who've turned up. I mean, I'm amazed that you guys have even come to, if I'd seen the title, intellectualism and all that, thinking, oh my God, what the hell? Yeah. That's not fun. Yeah? What's the point of going to that one? And I can't, I'm a bit struck really. There's older people here. I mean, Benji, if you don't mind me saying, you're from my generation and older. And when you spoke and I thought, I said, oh my God, right? She's an intellectual. I'm going to keep quiet. This woman knows something. And there are people like you. I don't know who you are. I don't even know your name. But oh my God, there are people in our community, like Benji and stuff, and the guy speaking from the back and all that. You guys are intellectual people. Guru Sahib has given bakshish and all that. You come from generations of Sikhs who are super intelligent people who wrote these books, right? Pandit Devi Das. We got, like you said, we got an analogy to the word Pandit. Pandit means a scholar. It doesn't mean that this Pandit who did a Brahman again. Yes, they are also called Pandit, but Pandit Devi Das was a good Sikh. Yeah, he was a scholar. He wasn't just a poet and all that. He was a Sikh of the Guru. And his works are here. This is the Hitu Upadesh. Look at this. Look at this pothi. I mean, I think first of all, why couldn't you split it up in two? I would say to the guy. Right? Key load se addi moti banani. Why couldn't you put it on a bigger piece of paper? Koi paper nahi milta si thonu. Right? So I would have some criticism about who wrote this. Look at this. This is ridiculous. And so therefore I haven't opened it because it will come apart if I did. But Hitu Upadesh is one of the one of the writings within this pothi. And so, look, first of all, I am really grateful that you have all come here to listen to Satnam. And I'm grateful for Satnam to have entered the arena of Sikh thought and challenging. I don't all agree with everything he's saying, but he's definitely challenging my mind about things. Before him, I had a different view about the poets of Anandpur. I had read Puran, जिन्होंने poets बारे लिखे ने वो नाम क्या उन्होंने हाँ जी हाँ Pyara Singh Padam. So yeah, Pyara Singh Padam, all of these books are basically in Gurmukhi. So yeah, it's basic. It doesn't challenge anything. It doesn't give you that kind of like, now Satnam challenges my brain. He kind of makes me think of, okay, it's not the way these Babas and these Pracharaks have taught us about Sikhi. Sikhi was a bit different. And it is different because when you look into this, you can't deny it. You cannot deny that in that time, people wrote these books, right? People wrote them. You cannot deny it. Why did they write them? It's not just one or two books, but there are many of them that are in existence that makes you believe. Okay, the other thing that you were talking about, Anandpur Sahib, I think that is totally BS about Hanji.
Why do you say you can't believe it? Because Guru Granth Sahib Ji was written during that time also, and other books were also written, like Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata
Hanji.
was written. So
Hanji.
why you're saying you can't believe that these people were writing the books? Because that time the source of books was knowledge.
हाँ exactly. मेरा कहना मतलब, yeah, मेरी English अदा है क्या? मेरा कहना मतलब है कि I do believe it, but it's like amazing. I don't believe it. That's what I'm saying. हाँ जी, हाँ जी. So मेरा कहना मतलब है क्या? It's yeah. No. I नहीं. देखो, saying that the Guru Sahib ने शब्द ਨੂੰ बहुत ਉੱਚਾ ਦਰਜਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ. Okay, that's what I'm saying. कई बारी English ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you can't say the same thing as you can say it in Punjabi. ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਇਤਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਸਥਾਨ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਹੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈ. You understand, yeah? So ਮੇਰਾ ਕਹਿਣ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਲਿਖੇ ਨੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. There's nothing wrong with that. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਇਤਨਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਲਿਖੀ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ. ਤੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ. ਕਹਿਣ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ without these manuscripts and all that, what is Sikhi? What is Sikhi without the Shabad? What is Sikhi without knowing what the written word is? Which is why there has been an emphasis, especially देखो जदों Guru Amardas ji होए ने, they sent out किन्नियां मंजियां? 22 manjiya. There were institutions sent all across India to do the prachar, and the pothiyan were written during that time. There was a mission to get the Sikhs to start writing these pothiyan. It wasn't just done by Bhai Mani Singh, which is the story is that Bhai Mani Singh ji ne pothiyan likhya, padshah kita, ye kita, wo kita. It was being done right. In fact, I have some pothiyan at home which are from Guru Amardas ji's time. I've got 2 pothiyan written at the time of Guru Amardas ji, and I'll show you this one, which is a handwritten of by Gurdas ji Sukhmani Sahib. So this is an extremely rare and valuable pothi, which is in the hand of Bhai Gurdas ji. So you can ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ photo ਖਿੱਚ ਸਕਦੇ ਵਗੈਰਾ. So these are totally invaluable. Going back to the Bhai Mani Singh Ji di Gyan Ratnavali, then I was reading this the other day, and the last page of it, guess what was written on the last sentences there? It says, Vaiguru Naam Jahaz hai chade sutre par. Jo Sharda kar sevde gurpari utaran har. And you know, for about 30, 40 years, people have been asking, where does that come from? Who wrote that? Did the Singh Sabha movement write that? Is this a modern invention? Vaiguru Naam Jahaz. Many Sikhs don't even read it in their Ardas. Kande kithe likhya hai? Kine likhya hai? Singh Sabha ne likhya, yeah? Or Bhai Veer Singh. Well, at least I can tell you that this book, written in 1862, it's got it in there. So in 1862, they used to read it. Yeah? Whether Bhai Mani Singh wrote it, I don't know. But if we believe that Bhai Mani Singh Ji is the author of Gyan Ratnavali, then we could probably then argue that Bhai Mani Singh Ji wrote it. Hun tusi kaun hage kehn wale ki assi nahi padhna?
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Haan ji.
Bhai Gurdas Ji Wara was not known to Sikhism until 19th century. It was claimed only by Dr. Veer Singh, who brought Bhai Gurdas Ji Wara from his grandfather. So Bhai Mani Singh Ji quoting Gurdas Ji Wara doesn't make much.
Not necessarily. Good argument, but I have hand copies of Bhai Gurdas Ji Wara written in the early 1800s.
1800s, that's fine. 1800,
yeah.
The time of the era. Because Bhai Mani Singh Ji was 1730.
Cholo, I don't know. I don't know for a fact, but what we do know is that Bhai Gurdas Ji did write the Vara. We know that. And they existed in Guru Arjan Dev Ji's time. We also know that. Is it possible that only one pothi was written of Bhai Gurdas and never written any more? Nobody ever copied it? I don't think so. I don't believe it. And I think that by Gurdas Ji, because of his presence and his authority, it is very likely in historical terms that he was a missionary and that he probably used his vara to disseminate Sikhi throughout the Punjab and elsewhere. That's what my view is, but I can't prove it and you can't disprove me in other words. But anyway, so Hanji. No. We'll finish off now, because I think the most important thing to recognize here is that we've got scholars within our Sikh faith, young guys who've been asking questions and stuff. Satnam Singh's coming through. I'm so pleased that there is an interest. Once you have an interest, there's going to be questions, there's going to be arguments. Well, go for it. Let's have arguments. Let's discuss this, because for the last 100 years, nobody's even discussed these things. So I'm so happy that people are starting to ask questions. Let's have those discussions, let's have those arguments, and let's not be frightened to go beyond our normal thinking, this is black and this is white, but let's have an intellectual arguments and let's learn more about Sikhi, right, through these real artifacts. If I may, just as a last one, this one is a tika of Japji Sahib. Now, on the face of it, there are so many tika of Japji Sahib you can get hold of. In other words, they're translations of Japji Sahib or a descriptive narrative about Japji Sahib, not necessarily word per word. This one, which is absolutely unique, does do word to word. So, painstakingly, in the middle of the page, the whole of the Guru Granth Sahib has been written, and on the right and the left-hand side, each word has been numbered in gold, ink, and then each word has been translated. The whole of the Guru Granth Sahib has been written like this. It's like, how did somebody do that? What I have here is the first part of it, which is the Japji Sahib. And then it goes into, I have all of the Suhi Rag in the Guru Granth Sahib. So the whole of the Guru Granth Sahib would have been done, but I don't know where all the other parts are. What we have here is the Japji Sahib and that. Now, I have many Japji Sahib De translations and TKs, and this was another one that I came across, and the language of it reminded me of what I had learned from Dr. Chand, that this is the kind of language which was spoken during Pai Mani Singh's time. Don't ask me how and whatever, it's been like 40 years of understanding and so on. So I read it and so on. Right at the end of this Japji Sahib, and let me tell you that the essence of it was very Gurmat orientated, not using Veds and Puranas to describe Gurbani or Gurmat, but using Gurmat itself and Gurbani to describe Gurbani. Okay? So let me read just the first sentence when I saw it, and I thought, this is good. It says, "Ik Onkar Satgur Prasad, ta jap di gosht karke sari Sikh mandri nu jita." There is a lot of an acceptance that the Japji Sahibs, in essence, was a discussion between Guru Nanak Dev Ji and the Siddhs and stuff, whatever. So then it says कि अपना पंथ निराला किता कि गुरु साहब ने अपना रास्ता जड़ा धर्म है उसनू बिल्कुल निराला बिल्कुल या इस तरह किता कलयुग विच जप ते तप खरे कठिन हैं कि it is very hard to do those kinds of tedious austerities and stuff which the Hindu dharma and other dharmas do, jap and tap कठिन हैं ते नाम सुखाला है कि नाम is the easier way and that is the way. ते नाम सुखाला है ते नाम ही दड़ाया है कि नाम नू गुरु नानक देव जी ने दड़ाया है मतलब उसनू या प्रचलित किया है भावें गृहस्थी विच होवन भावें फकीरी विच होवन नाम ही कल्याण करदा है. So that was the introduction of it. I thought, oh, that's good कि नाम दे ऊपर इन्हें काफ़ी जोर पाया. It was only near the end of it that this person who is writing it diverges slightly from the Japji Sahib and he says, you know what, जिथे आप सचखंड बारे गल करदे ना ते and it says कि सिखा भाई मनी सिंह जी नू प्रश्न कीता कि whoever wrote this is writing in a manner that is in present tense and saying कि I spoke to Pai Mani Singh कि मैं उन्हें प्रश्न कीता because Bhai Mani Singh was known to have established a taksal and stuff of learned people and writing these pothiyan. So in there it says कि सिखां भाई मनी सिंह जी ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਸ਼ਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਚਾਹਵਾਂ ਮੁਕਤਾ ਦਾ ਰੂਪ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾਵੋ ਕਿ tell us who actually does go to Sachkhand, ਕੌਣ ਜਾਂਦਾ Sachkhand. And in here it diverges from the Japji Sahib's strict thing, and it says that Bhai Mani Singh has told me that there are 4 ways of going to Sachkhand. And you'll find these words probably never been seen or heard ever before, right? Because you're the first ones that I'm telling it to. It says, Bhai Mani Singh Ji keha, ke Bhai Mani Singh Ji ne manu ek dasya. Salok. Now these words are actually, you can even check on Mahan Kosh, because I didn't know what this Punjabi word was. Salok, Sarup, Sameep, te Sajuj. And I said, what is this word? But it comes from Punjabi, Prani. And these words are actually in Mahan Kosh as well. It says, Salok Mukte isnu kende hain jo Baikunt Tham ja basna. Ke o lok jede who live in Sachkhand, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝੋ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸੱਚਖੰਡ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਜੈਸੇ ਕੋਈ ਰਾਮਦਾਸਪੁਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਈ ਬਸੇ just like all the people who live in Amritsar. Ramdaspur was the old name for it. Okay, if we accept that those people who live in Sachkhand has reached God, then surely the people who live in Ramdaspur, they must be also reaching God. जैसे कोई रामदासपुरे विच जाई बसे रामदासपुरे विच गरीब और तुंग सब रहंदे हैं होर थे भाव हुंदा है गुरु दी जागा निरपै हुंदा है कि उन्हां नू fear and faith of the Guru ਹੁੰਦਾ but they also have respect and ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਡਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਭਾਈ ਮਨੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਸਰੂਪ ਕਿ there is another way you can reach God. Why don't you look like God himself? Right? If you looked like God, then I should think that you have reached God. So it says ਸਰੂਪ ਮੁਕਤ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੈ ਜੈਸੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਨ का रूप चतुर्भुज है. Now Vishnu is an embodiment of God, and they say that Vishnu was very beautiful. And if we accept कि विशन का रूप बहुत खूबसूरत है, then सब ही ईश्वर उस में पाए जाते हैं तैसा ही ओ होवे. Okay. जैसे रामदासपुरे विच वसे and says कि okay, then you can either look like God, like those people who live in Ramdaspur in Amritsar. जैसे रामदासपुरे विच वसे केश कच किरपान ਇਹ ਚੈਨ ਵੀ ਹੋਵਨ ਤੇ ਸੁਖ ਵੀ ਸਭੇ ਹੋਵਨ ਤੇ ਸਰੂਪ ਮੁਕਤ ਹੈ ਕਿ if they kept their kesh, if they wore a kashara and a kirpan, they would look like God. And Bhai Mani Singh Ji says they will reach God as well. So ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਹ 4 ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੈਰਾਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਲਿਖੇ ਨੇ about ਕੌਣ ਉੱਥੇ ਮੁਕਤੀ ਪਾਵੇਗਾ. So in these books are hidden gems that ਲੋਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਕੇਸ ਰੱਖੋ, ਕਿੱਥੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਿਰਪਾਨ ਪਾਓ. Well, here you have a manuscript written at the time of Bhai Mani Singh, and it says that Bhai Mani Singh is saying it. Here we have historical facts. ਕਿੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੇਸ ਰੱਖੋ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਰਪਾਨ ਪਾਓ. Here we have what is arguably that Bhai Mani Singh himself is saying it in the present tense. So enough to say that these manuscripts, I haven't gone out to look out for them. Now they all come to me. I'm not joking, but I get people calling me on a weekly basis. We found another one. We found this one. We found this one. And I'm kind of like thinking, oh God, I need to find another business. I need to make more money because I can't afford this stuff. All right. In India, people have got to know that log khreedde ne, and their prices have gone crazy. They're charging, for a basic pothi with Gurbani written on it, 5,000, 10,000 pounds. Yeah, for basic pothiyan. Things like these don't even exist. If they did, there will be in excess of 30, 40, 50,000 pounds. Yeah, so money is required to preserve this. Then you need people to find them and hold them for you, otherwise they get lost in the system. So there is so much to say about these pothiya. I am just very pleased that after 40 years of holding on to them, that we've got people like Satnam who's written this fantastic book, unbelievable book, right, full of so much knowledge and deep understanding and challenging our view of the way we've been brought up with Sikhi. So I'm thankful to you, and I'm thankful to all of you who've come here and are going to be at the workshop on Sunday. I'll be there as well. And so thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. Please do buy these books, what Satnam has written, because all of this stuff is in his book. And he has presented it in a way that you could spend 40 years trying to work it out, but he's done it in his book. And so I wholeheartedly would say that this is a one-off thing, incredible work. But yeah, maybe on Sunday we can discuss things about these pothia and these manuscripts. I did bring a couple here that you could have. These two are unopened. They were published in 1886. 1886. Right? You can work out yourself what was happening in 1886 in India. So these two books are, one of them is Panj Granthi, so it contains the 5 major Baniya, and the other one is Baivara, 22 Vara, which in the Guru Granth Sahib. They're printed. So they were printed in 1886. They're unopened books. Some of the pages have printed of the Guru's paintings and stuff in it. So you could even take that out and frame it, and you know for sure that it was done in 1886. So this is real history here. Now, I'm not whether I'm going to give it to you free or you want to donate something to it, or we'll have a raffle or something on Sunday, right? But these two books I will let go, and these are historical, right? These are real stuff. And the paper is so fragile, I don't even know how they even used it, because when you move the paper across, it's wafer thin. And the akkars are very big in Gurmukhi. But so these two, we will do something to them on Sunday, if anyone can come along. And yeah, if you've got any questions and stuff, we can do that. But I think time has run out here. Hanji Paji?
It's a very important question. I think everybody might be having the same question. How we authenticate them? Of course, these books are old. But how we authenticate before buying any books?
Oh.
It's coming from the right age.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember at that time,
yes.
what happened when Sikhs were out in jungles,
yeah.
and the Sikhs were away. All these Udasis and Nirmal Panth had started writing these books and tried to sell it off to make a money. And this could be preserved by those people to make a money. So I just want to ensure how we authenticate. Have you done any forensic study of the ink, the paper?
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yeah, so we have a group of people, not just Sikhs, but especially their English, who are experts in paper preservation. And I've got a guy who is he's done an academic in art history, Sikh history. So we know about the inks that have been used. Then we've got people who know about the script that has been written. For instance, this is very much like a Kashmiri style, and you've got other styles here. Then you've got the sammats written inside there, and then you've got the paper, then you've got the style of the writing. And remember, lots of these are copies of historical books and so on. So there is no doubt about the fact that when you see an original, you know it's an original. But unfortunately, yeah, there are some coming through that are written on old paper, but they're not actually authenticated because they don't date them, because they know that it will be found out. So just like everything in life, including the arms and khande and the karpana that all the guys are buying and all that, I'm afraid that it is 100 times more difficult to authenticate those things than it is these books, right? The karpana that you buy for, 1,000, 2,000 pounds, a khanda for 10,000 pounds, right? Then somebody's written in gold Akal Sahai in the thing. These are modern, done in Jaipur and stuff. They know that you guys have got money and they're selling this on the market. But let's not become too negative about the whole thing and say, well, all of these are fake. Let's throw them all away. Now, that is not what we're saying. Yeah? Everything can be a fake, yeah. But thank God, the majority of what we've got, that we do know, is absolutely authentic. Yeah. And so that's the way it is. So let's wrap it up here. It's getting late. Some of you might come on Sunday. Satnam, if you want to say last few words and thank everyone. And so, thank you for having us here. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and I hope many of you will just, before you leave, hope many of you will take a good look at the different manuscripts. Like, for many people, this is like once in a lifetime opportunity. I think I was like 32 years old when I saw my first Bodhi, so this is quite a...
Look, as a rule, I never show these and I never exhibit them because you can't take these relics out and keep on showing them, opening them, right? You can't do that. And I've learned from Dr. Chan's days that people do steal, and then when they touch things and all that, these relics can't be replicated and stuff. So I don't bring them out. I only brought them out because Satnam rang me about a week ago and says, oh, I'm coming to England. Do you mind presenting some of your potia? And I thought, oh, okay. You know, and then literally yesterday I was putting them in a suitcase and all that. And, you know, I forgot that these are like wood. You know, these weigh a lot of weight here. And, you know, I could hardly carry the thing. But I am mindful that I don't want to harm them in any way. So I won't be presenting them anywhere. This is the one-off chance. I'll do it again on Sunday. And I'm paranoid about them getting lost or getting stolen and stuff. So have a good look today. I can't guarantee even on Sunday. I will try to come, yeah, but I'm not going to say 100%, right? But I will try to come. But this is going to be a one-off. I'm not in the business of showing it around unless we can. As a Sikh community, Dr. Chan used to have a dream of a museum. I've got lots of his publications where he used to say Sikh Museum Initiative, da 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 da. And then you got some guys, you know, running around saying we're Sikh Museum and this, that. What is your museum? You don't even have a single artifact. What museum do you have? They've got 3D, you know, pictures of things. And where we actually have the stuff, but as a community, we can't have a room or a place where we can actually make it authentically like a museum. Why? We've got so much money in our institutions. You can make 100 gurdwara, right? We're doing the same thing, which is nothing. They do nothing for the community. You know, Kirtan Kalita end. That's it. That's all they do. And there's nothing for the community. Nothing at all is being done for the community. But hey, you are the new generation. What are you going to do? What is your legacy? What are you going to do? You know, you're going to take charge of the Gurdwara and do the same thing? Or are we actually going to start making institutions like a library where people like Satnam could come, stay the nights there? They have this, you know, like the British Library, right? Where you have people properly, you know, these manuscripts will be there for people to research on, right? That's what we need. And so, you know, I'm 63 now, maybe got another few years, 10 years, and this and that. I know my years have gone. It's people like Satnam could do something now. People like you could do something now. It's for you. I've got the stuff. It's for you guys. Now it's up to you where you want to take this stuff. I preserved it, right? Now you have to take this further step and say we need an institution where we keep all this stuff, where scholars can come and look at them and investigate them. Because nobody would have known that Pai Mani Singh has written this in a poti until I read it. Because nobody was interested to even read it, because it's Japji Sahib Dakika. Yeah? But within the pages, how would we have known that Waheguru Naam Jahaz was written in 1862, right? Probably from Gyan Ratnavali, dating back even before. Yeah? So here we got answers. But you can only get those answers if you do the research. And if you question it, is what Satnam is doing. So thank you. Thank you for all of you. Come around and have a look and have a chat just before.
One last minute, please, sorry. Just one last thing. Thank you everyone for coming and for joining us for this first intellectual series at the Sabha. So this is hopefully the first of many, and we want to continue doing this throughout the next year. So we're really grateful to Satnam Singh and Dr. Ji for hosting and doing a really good presentation. And Dr. Ji, thank you so much for bringing the Pothia as well. That's such a rare and meaningful thing to see. And apologies on behalf of the General Secretary's office. They supported this event fully, but they weren't able to attend. And just a few announcements. So obviously, you know, on the 29th, we've got the workshop happening at Norwood Green. So please do come down for that, and we can have more of these discussions which really need to happen in the Panth. And then on the 19th of January, we have our first talk of the new year with Ranveer Singh. So he's another author, really distinguished author about Raj Niti, politics, this same kind of area of expertise. So please do come to that. And then finally, we have books available at a discounted price. So please do go, and also calendars available as well. And we just wanted to give a bit of a satkar to Satnam Singh and Dr. Ji for all their efforts. So, Gusaman, Ken. So, not a traditional saropa, but
thank you so much.
Bole so nihal. Bole so nihal. So thank you everyone for coming, and I think we'll end it there. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.